Once upon a time, in a valley surrounded by gentle mountains, there stood an old inn that had welcomed travelers for over 100 years. The cozy mountain inn had weathered many seasons, its wooden beams growing stronger with age, its stone foundation as solid as the mountains themselves. The inn was run by a kind woman named Eleanor Gray, who had inherited it from her grandmother. Eleanor had soft silver hair that she wore in a braid down her back, and she had a way of making everyone who walked through her door feel like they were coming home. She lived at the inn year-round with her golden retriever, Biscuit, who greeted every guest with a wagging tail and gentle brown eyes. It was late autumn when our story begins, on an evening when the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. The inn glowed warmly in the twilight, smoke curling from its chimneys, and lanterns flickering in every window. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, stirring a large pot of vegetable soup that bubbled gently on the old cast-iron stove. The kitchen smelled of herbs and fresh-baked bread, and Biscuit lay in his favorite spot near the hearth, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the delicious aromas. "Quiet evening tonight," Eleanor said to Biscuit, who thumped his tail in response. She had only 2 guests staying at the inn, Mr. Peterson, a retired schoolteacher who came every autumn to paint the changing leaves, and young Sarah Chun, a writer who had rented a room for the month to finish her novel. Just as Eleanor was about to ring the dinner bell, she heard the sound of a car engine struggling up the mountain road. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front window, pulling back the lace curtain. Through the thickening snow, she could see headlights approaching slowly. "Well now," she murmured. "Looks like we have another guest arriving." Biscuit stood and stretched, ready to greet whoever was coming. The car, a small blue sedan covered in road dust, pulled into the inn's parking area and came to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped a man in his 30s wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and shoulders that sagged with weariness. Eleanor opened the front door before he could knock. Come in from the cold," she called out warmly. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed." The man climbed the porch steps slowly, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'm James Mitchell. I don't have a reservation, but I saw your sign from the road and, well, I just need somewhere to stay for a while." "We always have room for those who need it," Eleanor said, stepping aside to let him enter. Biscuit approached cautiously, sniffing James's hand before giving it a gentle lick. "This is Biscuit. He's our official welcoming committee. I'm Eleanor, and this is my inn." James managed a small smile as he patted Biscuit's head. "It's nice to meet you both." Eleanor studied him with the practiced eye of someone who had seen many weary travelers over the years. She noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he set down his briefcase. This was a man carrying burdens far heavier than his luggage. "Let me take your coat," she said gently. "Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes. Why don't you get settled in your room, and then come down to the dining room? It's just through there." She pointed to a doorway where warm light spilled out. "I'm really quite tired," James began. "Maybe I could just—" "Nonsense," Eleanor said with a kind but firm tone. "You need food in your belly. I won't take no for an answer. Besides, it's vegetable soup and fresh bread, nothing heavy, just what you need on a cold night." James found he didn't have the energy to argue, and truthfully, the smell of the soup was making his stomach rumble. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a proper meal. "All right," he agreed. "Thank you." Eleanor led him upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. She unlocked the door and handed him the key, an actual metal key, not a plastic card. "Room 7, she said. "It's my favorite. It faces east, so you'll get the morning sun if the sky clears." The room was perfect in its simplicity. A large bed with a thick quilt in shades of blue and green dominated the space. There was a wooden dresser, a comfortable reading chair by the window, and a small desk with a lamp. Watercolor paintings of mountain wildflowers hung on the cream-colored walls. "The bathroom is through there," Eleanor pointed. "Fresh towels are on the shelf. Take your time and come down when you're ready." After she left, James sat on the edge of the bed and felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease ever so slightly. The room was warm and quiet, and through the window, he could see the snow falling more heavily now, creating a peaceful white curtain between the inn and the rest of the world. He thought about the events that had brought him here, the job he'd quit that morning after months of sleepless nights, the apartment he'd left behind, the life that had stopped feeling like his own. He'd just started driving, with no destination in mind, until the snow had forced him to find shelter. James washed his face in the small bathroom, ran his fingers through his hair, and changed out of his suit jacket into a sweater. When he came downstairs, he followed the sound of voices and the smell of food to the dining room. It was a cozy space with a long wooden table that could seat 12, though tonight only 3 places were set. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and biscuit lay sprawled in front of it. An elderly man with white hair and paint-stained fingers sat at one end of the table, and a young woman in her 20s with short black hair and glasses sat across from him. They both looked up as James entered. "Ah, our mystery guest arrives," the elderly man said cheerfully. "I'm Harold Peterson, but everyone calls me Mr. Peterson. I taught high school English for 40 years before retiring to pursue my true passion, mediocre landscape painting." He chuckled at his own self-deprecation. The young woman smiled. "I'm Sarah. I'm hiding from the world while I try to write a novel. So far, I'm mostly just drinking Eleanor's excellent coffee and staring out the window." James managed a more genuine smile this time. "I'm James. I'm not really sure what I'm doing here, to be honest." "The best reason to be anywhere," Mr. Peterson said wisely. "Sit, sit. Eleanor's soup is the cure for just about everything." As if on cue, Eleanor entered carrying a large tureen of soup, with biscuit trailing hopefully behind her. She ladled generous portions into each bowl, then brought out a basket of warm bread and a crock of butter. "Eat up," she said, "and don't worry about conversation. Sometimes silence is the best companion for a meal." They ate in comfortable quiet, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. The soup was rich and warming, filled with root vegetables and herbs that seemed to carry the essence of the mountain itself. The bread was crusty on the outside and soft within, perfect for soaking up every last drop. James found himself relaxing despite his exhaustion. There was something healing about this place, about these people who asked no questions and offered nothing but kindness. As he finished his second bowl of soup, he felt the first stirring of something he hadn't felt in months: peace. After dinner, Mr. Peterson excused himself to his room, mentioning something about catching the light for an early morning painting session. Sarah lingered by the fire with a cup of tea, a notebook open on her lap but her pen idle. Eleanor began clearing the dishes, and James stood to help. "Please," he said. "It's the least I can do." "All right then," Eleanor agreed. "I never turned down help in the kitchen." They worked in companionable silence, James washing and Eleanor drying. Through the kitchen window, the snow continued to fall, already accumulating on the windowsill. The world outside seemed very far away. "How long has this inn been here?" James asked finally. Eleanor smiled as she put away a plate. "Over 100 years. My great-grandmother built it with her husband after they emigrated from Scotland. They wanted to create a place where travelers could rest and feel safe. Every generation since has kept that promise." "It feels different here," James said quietly. "Like time moves differently." "It does," Eleanor agreed. "The mountains have their own rhythm. People come here when they need to remember what matters. Some stay a night, some stay longer. You'll stay as long as you need to." James felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear those words. "Thank you," he managed. That night, as James lay in the comfortable bed in room 7, listening to the wind whisper through the pine trees and the olden settle around him, he felt something shift inside. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight he was safe. Tonight he could rest. And as the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in peaceful white, James Mitchell drifted into the first truly restful sleep he'd had in months. James woke to sunlight streaming through the window of room 7. For a moment he didn't know where he was, and then the memory of the previous evening came back to him. The long drive, the snow, Eleanor's kind face at the door. He stretched beneath the warm quilt and realized something remarkable. He had slept through the entire night without waking once. He checked his phone on the nightstand. It was nearly 9 o'clock. When was the last time he'd slept past 6? He couldn't remember. There were no urgent emails, no messages that couldn't wait. He set the phone back down, and went to the window. The world had transformed overnight. Everything was covered in a blanket of fresh snow that sparkled in the morning sun like scattered diamonds. The pine trees wore white mantles, and the mountains in the distance looked like something from a fairy tale. Smoke rose from the inn's chimneys, and James could see footprints in the snow. Someone had already been up and about. He showered and dressed, then made his way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. In the dining room, he found Mr. Peterson sitting by the window with a sketch pad, and Sarah hunched over her laptop with a steaming mug beside her. "Good morning," Mr. Peterson called out cheerfully. "You're just in time. Eleanor's making her famous cinnamon rolls." Sarah looked up and smiled. "Fair warning, they're addictive. I've gained 5 pounds since I got here 3 weeks ago, and I regret nothing." James poured himself coffee from a carafe on the sideboard, and Eleanor emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of golden cinnamon rolls, their icing still melting and dripping down the sides. "Good morning, James," she said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," he admitted, taking a seat at the table. "The mountain air does that," Eleanor said, setting the plate down. "That, and being away from whatever was troubling you." She said it matter-of-factly, without prying, and James appreciated her for it. He took a cinnamon roll and bit into it. It was heavenly, soft and sweet with just the right amount of cinnamon. "These are incredible," he said. "My grandmother's recipe," Eleanor explained. She believed that good food heals the soul as much as the body. As they ate breakfast, Mr. Peterson told them about the painting he'd started that morning. "The light on the snow was extraordinary," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've been painting these mountains for 15 years, and they still surprise me every day." "Why do you keep coming back?" James asked. Mr. Peterson set down his coffee cup and gazed out the window thoughtfully. "After my wife died, I didn't know what to do with myself. 40 years of teaching, and suddenly I had all this time and no one to share it with. I came here on a whim one autumn, and Eleanor, well, she didn't try to fix me or cheer me up. She just gave me space to grieve and heal in my own way. I've been coming back ever since." Sarah nodded. "I know what you mean. I was supposed to finish my novel months ago, but I kept staring at blank pages in my apartment in the city. Too many distractions, too much noise. Here, it's like I can finally hear my own thoughts again." James felt a kinship with both of them. "I left my job yesterday," he heard himself say. "Just walked out. I've been working 80-hour weeks for 5 years, climbing the ladder, doing everything I was supposed to do. And yesterday, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt happy. So I left." No one rushed to fill the silence that followed. Eleanor simply refilled his coffee cup. Mr. Peterson nodded understandingly, and Sarah said quietly, "That takes courage." "Or stupidity," James said with a weak laugh. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Mr. Peterson replied. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" James shook his head. "I have no idea. I just knew I needed to get away, to think, to figure out who I am without that job defining me." Eleanor sat down at the table, something she rarely did during breakfast. Biscuit immediately came and rested his head on her knee. "You know," she said, "my grandfather used to say that the inn isn't just a place, it's a pause. A breath between one chapter of life and the next. People don't usually end up here by accident." "How long do people usually stay?" James asked. Eleanor smiled. "As long as they need to. Some folks stay a few days, some stay weeks. One woman stayed for 3 months while she decided whether to go through with her wedding. She left eventually, decided to marry him after all. They send me a Christmas card every year with pictures of their children." "What about the man who carved the bear in the sign above the door?" Sarah asked. "You mentioned him once, but never finished the story." Eleanor's expression grew soft with memory. "That was Thomas Whitfield. He arrived here in the middle of winter, 20 years ago now. He'd been a carpenter before an accident cost him 2 fingers on his right hand. He thought his life was over, that he'd never create anything beautiful again. He stayed here for 6 months, barely speaking to anyone, just sitting in the workshop out back that my father had built." "What happened to him?" James asked. "One day he started carving. Said he had to learn to work differently with his injury, but that maybe different didn't mean worse. He made that sign as a gift before he left. Last I heard, he has a studio in Montana and sells his sculptures to galleries all over the country. He still sends me one piece every year. I have a whole collection now." The story settled over them like a gentle blanket. James looked around the table at these people he'd only just met and felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe he wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe this was just a pause, a breath, before whatever came next. After breakfast, Eleanor suggested that James might enjoy a walk around the property. "The trails are beautiful after a snow," she said. "Just follow the path behind the inn. It loops around and brings you back. You can't get lost." James bundled up in his coat and borrowed a pair of boots from the mudroom. Biscuit bounded up hopefully, and Eleanor nodded. "He'd love to go with you, if you don't mind the company." "I'd like that," James said, and he meant it. The cold air hit his face as he stepped outside, crisp and clean. Biscuit ran ahead, leaping through the snow with pure joy, and James followed the path that wound through the pine trees. The only sounds were his footsteps crunching in the snow, Biscuit's occasional bark, and the whisper of wind through the branches. As he walked, James felt his mind beginning to quiet. All the thoughts that had been racing for months, about career trajectories and financial security and what people would think, started to fade into the background. Here, in this moment, there was just the snow and the trees and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The path led him to a small clearing where a frozen stream cut through the landscape. Biscuit found a stick and brought it to James hopefully. James threw it, watching the dog bound after it with boundless enthusiasm, and found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time and he couldn't remember how long. They played fetch for a while, and then James sat on a fallen log that had been brushed clear of snow, probably by Mr. Peterson during his morning painting session. Biscuit sat beside him, panting happily, and they looked out at the mountains together. "What am I doing, Biscuit?" James asked the dog. Biscuit just looked at him with those warm brown eyes and wagged his tail, as if to say that the answer was simple. "You're here, you're alive, and that's enough for now." When they returned to the inn an hour later, James's cheeks were red from the cold, and his spirits felt lighter than they had in months. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and the smell of homemade soup, a different variety from the night before, filled the air. "Good walk?" she asked. "Very good," James replied. "Thank you for suggesting it." "The mountains have a way of putting things in perspective," Eleanor said. "You look better already, more color in your face." That afternoon, James found himself in the inn's small library, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and furnished with 2 deep armchairs and a love seat. A fire burned in the fireplace, and Sarah was curled up in one of the chairs, typing away on her laptop. "Mind if I join you?" James asked. "Please do," Sarah said, gesturing to the other chair. "The company is nice, even if we're both doing our own thing." James browsed the shelves, finding an eclectic mix of novels, poetry, philosophy, and travel writing. He pulled out a worn copy of Walden, by Thoreau, and settled into the chair. He hadn't read for pleasure in years. There had never been time. They sat in companionable silence for a long while, the only sounds the crackling fire, Sarah's occasional typing, and the turning of pages. Outside the window, the snow had started falling again, soft and gentle. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said eventually, looking up from her laptop. "Sure," James replied. "Do you think it's possible to completely start over? To leave behind who you were and become someone new?" James considered the question carefully. "I don't know. A few days ago, I would have said no, that we're shaped by our past and there's no escaping it. But being here, I'm starting to think maybe we can't erase who we were, but we can choose who we want to be next. Does that make sense?" Sarah smiled. "It does. That's actually kind of what my novel is about, a woman who walks away from her entire life and has to figure out who she is without all the labels and expectations." "Is it autobiographical?" James asked gently. "Aren't all novels in some way?" Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "I was supposed to be a lawyer like my parents. Got into a great law school, started my first year, and realized I was absolutely miserable. I dropped out and told them I wanted to write instead. They didn't take it well. Are they still angry?" "We don't talk much," Sarah admitted. "But I'm writing, and that's something. Even if I'm not sure the book is any good, at least I'm doing what I love." "I think that takes more courage than most people have," James said. They fell back into comfortable silence, and James returned to his book. He found himself underlining passages that resonated with him. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fade, Mr. Peterson joined them in the library with his sketchpad. He settled onto the love seat and began drawing, occasionally glancing up at the room and its occupants. "What are you drawing?" Sarah asked during a break from her writing. "This moment," Mr. Peterson said simply. 3 people finding peace in a quiet room while the world goes on without them. There's something beautiful about that. Eleanor appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea and cookies. Thought you all might like a little something, she said, setting it on the small table between the chairs. Dinner will be ready at 6. Eleanor, James said as she turned to leave. Thank you. For all of this. For taking me in when I showed up without a reservation, for not asking questions, for just being kind. Eleanor's smile was warm and knowing. Oh, my dear boy, you're not the first lost soul to find their way to my door, and you won't be the last. This inn has been a sanctuary for wanderers for over 100 years. You're exactly where you're meant to be. After she left, James poured tea for everyone, and they sat together as the snow continued to fall, and the fire crackled, and the world outside the cozy mountain inn seemed very far away indeed. For the first time in longer than he could remember, James wasn't thinking about what he should be doing or where he should be going. He was simply here in this moment, and that was enough. As evening approached and the room grew darker, Mr. Peterson lit the oil lamps that sat on the side tables, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The three of them, 3 strangers who had become something like friends in the span of a day, sat together in peaceful silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by the quiet understanding that they had all found something precious here. A place to rest, to heal, and to begin again. James woke to sunlight streaming through the window of room 7. For a moment, he didn't know where he was, and then the memory of the previous evening came back to him. The long drive, the snow, Eleanor's kind face at the door. He stretched beneath the warm quilt and realized something remarkable. He had slept through the entire night without waking once. He checked his phone on the nightstand. It was nearly 9 o'clock. When was the last time he'd slept past 6? He couldn't remember. There were no urgent emails, no messages that couldn't wait. He set the phone back down and went to the window. The world had transformed overnight. Everything was covered in a blanket of fresh snow that sparkled in the morning sun like scattered diamonds. The pine trees wore white mantles, and the mountains in the distance looked like something from a fairy tale. Smoke rose from the inn's chimneys, and James could see footprints in the snow. Someone had already been up and about. He showered and dressed, then made his way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. In the dining room, he found Mr. Peterson sitting by the window with a sketch pad, and Sarah hunched over her laptop with a steaming mug beside her. "Good morning," Mr. Peterson called out cheerfully. "You're just in time. Eleanor's making her famous cinnamon rolls." Sarah looked up and smiled. "Fair warning, they're addictive. I've gained 5 pounds since I got here 3 weeks ago, and I regret nothing." James poured himself coffee from a carafe on the sideboard, and Eleanor emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of golden cinnamon rolls, their icing still melting and dripping down the sides. "Good morning, James," she said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," he admitted, taking a seat at the table. "The mountain air does that," Eleanor said, setting the plate down. "That, and being away from whatever was troubling you." She said it matter-of-factly, without prying, and James appreciated her for it. He took a cinnamon roll and bit into it. It was heavenly, soft and sweet, with just the right amount of cinnamon. "These are incredible," he said. "My grandmother's recipe," Eleanor explained. She believed that good food heals the soul as much as the body. As they ate breakfast, Mr. Peterson told them about the painting he'd started that morning. "The light on the snow was extraordinary," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've been painting these mountains for 15 years, and they still surprise me every day." "Why do you keep coming back?" James asked. Mr. Peterson set down his coffee cup and gazed out the window thoughtfully. "After my wife died, I didn't know what to do with myself. 40 years of teaching, and suddenly I had all this time and no one to share it with. I came here on a whim one autumn, and Eleanor, well, she didn't try to fix me or cheer me up. She just gave me space to grieve and heal in my own way. I've been coming back ever since." Sarah nodded. "I know what you mean. I was supposed to finish my novel months ago, but I kept staring at blank pages in my apartment in the city. Too many distractions, too much noise. Here, it's like I can finally hear my own thoughts again." James felt a kinship with both of them. "I left my job yesterday," he heard himself say. "Just walked out. I've been working 80-hour weeks for 5 years, climbing the ladder, doing everything I was supposed to do. And yesterday, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt happy. So I left." No one rushed to fill the silence that followed. Eleanor simply refilled his coffee cup, Mr. Peterson nodded understandingly, and Sarah said quietly, "That takes courage." "Or stupidity," James said with a weak laugh. "Sometimes they're the same thing, Mr. Peterson replied. The question is, what are you going to do now? James shook his head. I have no idea. I just knew I needed to get away, to think, to figure out who I am without that job defining me. Eleanor sat down at the table, something she rarely did during breakfast. Biscuit immediately came and rested his head on her knee. You know, she said, my grandfather used to say that the inn isn't just a place, it's a pause. A breath between one chapter of life and the next. People don't usually end up here by accident. How long do people usually stay? James asked. Eleanor smiled. As long as they need to. Some folks stay a few days, some stay weeks. One woman stayed for 3 months while she decided whether to go through with her wedding. She left eventually, decided to marry him after all. They send me a Christmas card every year with pictures of their children. What about the man who carved the bear in the sign above the door? Sarah asked. You mentioned him once, but never finished the story. Eleanor's expression grew soft with memory. That was Thomas Whitfield. He arrived here in the middle of winter, 20 years ago now. He'd been a carpenter before an accident cost him 2 fingers on his right hand. He thought his life was over, that he'd never create anything beautiful again. He stayed here for 6 months, barely speaking to anyone, just sitting in the workshop out back that my father had built. What happened to him? James asked. One day he started carving. Said he had to learn to work differently with his injury, but that maybe different didn't mean worse. He made that sign as a gift before he left. Last I heard, he has a studio in Montana and sells his sculptures to galleries all over the country. He still sends me one piece every year. I have a whole collection now. The story settled over them like a gentle blanket. James looked around the table at these people he'd only just met and felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe he wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe this was just a pause, a breath, before whatever came next. After breakfast, Eleanor suggested that James might enjoy a walk around the property. The trails are beautiful after a snow, she said. Just follow the path behind the inn. It loops around and brings you back. You can't get lost. James bundled up in his coat and borrowed a pair of boots from the mudroom. Biscuit bounded up hopefully, and Eleanor nodded. He'd love to go with you, if you don't mind the company. I'd like that, James said, and he meant it. The cold air hit his face as he stepped outside, crisp and clean. Biscuit ran ahead, leaping through the snow with pure joy, and James followed the path that wound through the pine trees. The only sounds were his footsteps crunching in the snow, Biscuit's occasional bark, and the whisper of wind through the branches. As he walked, James felt his mind beginning to quiet. All the thoughts that had been racing for months, about career trajectories and financial security, and what people would think, started to fade into the background. Here, in this moment, there was just the snow and the trees and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The path led him to a small clearing where a frozen stream cut through the landscape. Biscuit found a stick and brought it to James hopefully. James threw it, watching the dog bound after it with boundless enthusiasm, and found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time and he couldn't remember how long. They played fetch for a while, and then James sat on a fallen log that had been brushed clear of snow, probably by Mr. Peterson during his morning painting session. Biscuit sat beside him, panting happily, and they looked out at the mountains together. As he walked, James felt his mind beginning to quiet. All the thoughts that had been racing for months, about career trajectories and financial security, and what people would think, started to fade into the background. Here, in this moment, there was just the snow and the trees and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The path led him to a small clearing where a frozen stream cut through the landscape. Biscuit found a stick and brought it to James hopefully. James threw it, watching the dog bound after it with boundless enthusiasm, and found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time and he couldn't remember how long. They played fetch for a while, and then James sat on a fallen log that had been brushed clear of snow, probably by Mr. Peterson during his morning painting session. Biscuit sat beside him, panting happily, and they looked out at the mountains together. "What am I doing, Biscuit?" James asked the dog. Biscuit just looked at him with those warm brown eyes and wagged his tail, as if to say that the answer was simple. "You're here, you're alive, and that's enough for now." When they returned to the inn an hour later, James's cheeks were red from the cold, and his spirits felt lighter than they had in months. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and the smell of homemade soup, a different variety from the night before, filled the air. "Good walk?" she asked. "Very good," James replied. "Thank you for suggesting it." "The mountains have a way of putting things in perspective," Eleanor said. You look better already, more color in your face." That afternoon, James found himself in the inn's small library, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and furnished with 2 deep armchairs and a love seat. A fire burned in the fireplace, and Sarah was curled up in one of the chairs, typing away on her laptop. "Mind if I join you?" James asked. "Please do," Sarah said, gesturing to the other chair. "The company is nice, even if we're both doing our own thing." James browsed the shelves, finding an eclectic mix of novels, poetry, philosophy, and travel writing. He pulled out a worn copy of Walden by Thoreau and settled into the chair. He hadn't read for pleasure in years. There had never been time. They sat in companionable silence for a long while, the only sounds the crackling fire, Sarah's occasional typing, and the turning of pages. Outside the window, the snow had started falling again, soft and gentle. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said eventually, looking up from her laptop. "Sure," James replied. "Do you think it's possible to completely start over? To leave behind who you were and become someone new?" James considered the question carefully. "I don't know. A few days ago, I would have said no, that we're shaped by our past and there's no escaping it. But being here, I'm starting to think maybe we can't erase who we were, but we can choose who we want to be next. Does that make sense?" Sarah smiled. "It does. That's actually kind of what my novel is about. A woman who walks away from her entire life and has to figure out who she is without all the labels and expectations." "Is it autobiographical?" James asked gently. "Aren't all novels in some way?" Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "I was supposed to be a lawyer like my parents. Got into a great law school, started my first year, and realized I was absolutely miserable. I dropped out and told them I wanted to write instead. They didn't take it well. Are they still angry?" "We don't talk much," Sarah admitted. "But I'm writing, and that's something. Even if I'm not sure the book is any good, at least I'm doing what I love." "I think that takes more courage than most people have," James said. They fell back into comfortable silence, and James returned to his book. He found himself underlining passages that resonated with him. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fade, Mr. Peterson joined them in the library with his sketchpad. He settled onto the love seat and began drawing, occasionally glancing up at the room and its occupants. "What are you drawing?" Sarah asked during a break from her writing. "This moment," Mr. Peterson said simply. "3 people finding peace in a quiet room while the world goes on without them. There's something beautiful about that." Eleanor appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea and cookies. "Thought you all might like a little something," she said, setting it on the small table between the chairs. "Dinner will be ready at 6. "Eleanor," James said as she turned to leave. "Thank you. For all of this. For taking me in when I showed up without a reservation, for not asking questions, for just being kind." Eleanor's smile was warm and knowing. "Oh, my dear boy, you're not the first lost soul to find their way to my door, and you won't be the last. This inn has been a sanctuary for wanderers for over 100 years. You're exactly where you're meant to be." After she left, James poured tea for everyone, and they sat together as the snow continued to fall and the fire crackled, and the world outside the cozy mountain inn seemed very far away indeed. For the first time in longer than he could remember, James wasn't thinking about what he should be doing or where he should be going. He was simply here, in this moment, and that was enough. As evening approached and the room grew darker, Mr. Peterson lit the oil lamps that sat on the side tables, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The 3 of them, 3 strangers who had become something like friends in the span of a day, sat together in peaceful silence, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the quiet understanding that they had all found something precious here, a place to rest, to heal, and to begin again. The next morning, James woke to the sound of voices outside his window. He rolled over and looked at the clock, 7:30. The sun was just beginning to paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. He got up and peered out the window to see what the commotion was about. In the driveway below, a bright yellow taxi was parked, its engine running and exhaust puffing white clouds into the cold air. Eleanor stood on the porch in her cardigan and boots, speaking with someone James couldn't quite see. Biscuit circled excitedly around whoever it was, his tail wagging furiously. Curious, James dressed quickly and headed downstairs. As he descended, he could hear Eleanor's voice more clearly now. "Of course we have room, dear. Come in, come in. Let me help you with those bags." James reached the bottom of the stairs just as Eleanor came through the front door, followed by a young woman who looked to be in her mid-20s. She had long auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a green winter coat that had seen better days. In each hand, she carried a battered suitcase, and a large backpack was slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying recently. "James," Eleanor said warmly, "this is Maggie." "Maggie, this is James. He's staying in room 7. "Hi," Maggie said quietly, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," James replied. "Welcome to the inn." Eleanor led Maggie upstairs to get her settled, and James made his way to the dining room, where he found Mr. Peterson and Sarah already at breakfast. The table was laden with scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh fruit. "New arrival?" Mr. Peterson asked, having clearly heard the commotion. "Looks like it," James said, pouring himself coffee. "A young woman named Maggie. She seemed upset." Sarah glanced toward the stairs. "Eleanor has a gift for finding people when they need help. Or maybe they find her. I'm still not sure which." They ate breakfast together, and about 20 minutes later, Eleanor came down with Maggie. The young woman had washed her face and changed into jeans and a soft gray sweater, but she still looked fragile, like someone holding themselves together through sheer willpower. "Everyone, this is Maggie Sullivan," Eleanor announced. "Maggie, you've already met James. This is Mr. Peterson, and this is Sarah. We're a friendly bunch here, so don't be shy." "It's nice to meet you all," Maggie said, taking a seat at the table. Her voice was soft, almost musical, with a hint of an accent James couldn't quite place. Eleanor fixed Maggie a plate of food and placed it in front of her with a gentle firmness that suggested she wouldn't accept any protests. "Eat up, dear. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Maggie picked at her food for a moment, then seemed to realize how hungry she actually was and began eating with more enthusiasm. The others continued their breakfast, not pressing her with questions, allowing her the space to simply be. After a few minutes, Maggie looked up from her plate. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this. The taxi driver in town said this place takes in strays." She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "I guess that's me right now." "We all are, in one way or another," Mr. Peterson said kindly. "That's why we're here." "Where were you before this?" Sarah asked gently. Maggie set down her fork and took a deep breath. "Nashville. I went there 3 years ago to try to make it as a singer-songwriter. My whole life, that's all I wanted, to make music, to share my songs with people. I worked 3 jobs to pay for studio time, played every open mic night I could find, sent demos to anyone who would listen." "And?" James prompted when she paused. "And nothing," Maggie said with a bitter smile. 3 years of nothing. I ran out of money last week. Had to give up my apartment. I'd been sleeping on friends' couches, but I couldn't keep doing that. Yesterday, I realized I had enough money for either another month of fighting for a dream that's never going to happen, or a bus ticket back to Maine and a little left over. I couldn't face going home, not yet. So I got off the bus at the last stop before the state line and asked where I could go to think. The driver told me about this place." Eleanor reached over and patted Maggie's hand. "You can stay as long as you need to figure things out. No pressure, no questions. Just rest and breathe and let the mountain do its work." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't have much money. I can pay for a few nights, but—" "We'll work something out," Eleanor said firmly. "I always need help around the inn. If you're willing to lend a hand with cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing, we can call it even." "Really?" Maggie asked, hope flickering across her face. "Really," Eleanor confirmed. "Now finish your breakfast. You'll feel better with some food in you." After breakfast, James found himself volunteering to help Eleanor with the dishes again. It had become a comfortable routine in just 2 days. As they worked, Eleanor hummed softly to herself, a tune James didn't recognize but found soothing. "You have a gift," James said as he dried a plate, "for knowing what people need." Eleanor smiled. "I've had a lot of practice. When you run an inn for as long as I have, you learn to read people. Everyone who comes here is running from something or searching for something. Sometimes both." "What am I running from?" James asked, surprising himself with the question. Eleanor looked at him thoughtfully. "I think you're running from a version of yourself that you built to please other people. And you're searching for who you actually are underneath all that." Her words hit him with unexpected force. "How did you?" "Like I said," Eleanor interrupted gently, "I've had a lot of practice. The question isn't why you're here, James. It's what you're going to do now that you are." Before James could respond, they heard music drifting from somewhere in the inn. A guitar, and then a voice, Maggie's voice. It was hauntingly beautiful, clear and pure with an aching quality that seemed to carry all the longing and heartbreak of someone who had given everything to a dream. Eleanor and James exchanged glances, then followed the sound to the library. Maggie sat in one of the armchairs with a guitar James hadn't noticed before, her eyes closed as she sang. Mr. Peterson and Sarah were already there, listening with rapt attention. The song was about leaving home, about chasing stars and finding only darkness, about the painful beauty of hope that refuses to die even when it probably should. When Maggie finished, she opened her eyes and seemed almost surprised to find an audience. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I just needed to play." "Disturb us?" Mr. Peterson exclaimed. "My dear girl, that was extraordinary. Where on earth did you learn to sing like that?" Maggie shrugged, embarrassed. "My grandmother taught me. She was from Ireland, came over when she was young. She used to sing the old songs, and I've always sung." "That wasn't just singing," Sarah said firmly. "That was art. Real art. How could Nashville not see that?" "Because talent isn't enough," Maggie said quietly. "You need connections, luck, timing. You need to be willing to compromise who you are to fit into whatever's marketable at the moment. I tried, I really did, but every time I changed my sound to fit what they wanted, it felt like I was losing a piece of myself. Eventually, I had to ask, what's the point of achieving your dream if you have to stop being yourself to do it?" James felt those words resonate deep in his chest. Wasn't that exactly what he'd done? Climbed the ladder, hit every metric, became exactly what the company wanted until he couldn't recognize himself anymore? "Play another song," Eleanor said, settling into the love seat. "Please. It's been too long since this old inn has heard live music." Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "This one's called The Long Way Home. I wrote it on the bus yesterday." She began to play, and this song was different, softer, more hopeful. It was about a traveler who gets lost but finds that being lost is sometimes the first step toward being found. As James listened, he felt something shift inside him. Maggie had lost everything she'd worked for, but here she was, still playing, still singing, still creating despite the pain. When the song ended, Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh, my dear child, that was beautiful. You haven't lost your dream. You've just discovered that maybe it looks different than you thought it would." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked. "You went to Nashville thinking success meant record deals and radio play and sold-out stadiums. But maybe your music was meant for something else. Maybe it was meant for small rooms and people who need to hear exactly what you're singing. Maybe it was meant for moments like this one, right here, right now." Maggie looked around at their faces, all of them moved by her music in a way that apparently years of Nashville industry professionals hadn't been. "I never thought of it that way." "That's because you were so focused on the destination that you forgot about the journey," Mr. Peterson said. "I did the same thing with my painting for years. I thought I had to be great, had to hang in museums, had to be recognized. It wasn't until I started painting just for the joy of it, just to capture a moment or a feeling, that I actually became any good." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I spent so long trying to write the kind of book that would impress my parents and my old professors that I forgot why I wanted to write in the first place. It wasn't until I came here and just let myself write the story I wanted to tell that the words finally started flowing." "We all lose our way sometimes," Eleanor said. "The trick is recognizing when the path we're on isn't taking us where we need to go, and having the courage to find a new one." They spent the rest of the morning in the library together. Maggie played a few more songs, some her own compositions, some traditional folk songs her grandmother had taught her. Between songs, they talked about dreams and disappointments, about the difference between giving up and letting go, about how failure sometimes looks a lot like redirection. At one point, Biscuit wandered in and immediately went to Maggie, resting his head on her knee. She scratched behind his ears absently, and James noticed that she seemed less fragile than she had at breakfast, as if the music and the conversation had begun to knit together some of what had been broken. For lunch, Eleanor made chicken and wild rice soup with fresh bread, and they all gathered around the dining table again. The snow had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the windows, making the icicles hanging from the eaves sparkle like crystal. "I've been thinking," Maggie said as they ate. "When I was in Nashville, I was so focused on making it big that I stopped enjoying music. I stopped writing songs because I wanted to, and started writing songs I thought people wanted to hear. I stopped performing for the love of it and started performing like it was a job interview. When did it all become so joyless?" When you started measuring your worth by other people's standards instead of your own, James said, and realized he was talking about himself as much as her. Maggie looked at him with understanding. That's exactly it. I let the music industry tell me I wasn't good enough, that my songs were too quiet or too weird or not commercial enough. I started believing them. I forgot that the reason I fell in love with music in the first place was because it made me feel alive. So what are you going to do now? Sarah asked. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but for the first time in 3 years, I'm not going to decide based on what I think I should do. I'm going to wait until I know what I want to do. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Eleanor said with approval. That's what the inn is for, giving people time and space to listen to themselves again. That afternoon, James volunteered to help Eleanor with some repairs around the inn. There was a loose board on the back porch that needed hammering down, and a window in one of the guest rooms that stuck when you tried to open it. As they worked together, Eleanor told him stories about the inn's history, about the guests who had stayed there over the years, about the storms it had weathered, about the love and laughter and tears its walls had witnessed. Every old building has a soul, Eleanor said as James hammered the final nail into the porch board. This one has seen more than its share of broken hearts finding their way back together. It's good at holding space for healing. Do you ever get tired of it? James asked. Taking care of everyone else all the time? Eleanor sat down on the porch steps, and Biscuit came to sit beside her. Sometimes, she admitted. But then someone like you or Maggie shows up, and I remember why I do this. We all need help sometimes, James. We all need a place where we can stop pretending everything's fine and just be honest about the fact that we're struggling. The inn is that place. James sat down beside her, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. I keep thinking I should be doing something, making plans, sending out resumes, figuring out my next move. But every time I try to think about the future, my mind just goes blank. That's not a bad thing, Eleanor said. Maybe you need the blank space. Maybe you've been so busy doing and planning and achieving that you forgot how to just be. There's wisdom in the pause, James. Don't rush it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, James realized he'd spent an entire day without checking his phone, without worrying about his empty calendar, without feeling the gnawing anxiety that had been his constant companion for so long. He'd simply existed in each moment, helping where he was needed, listening to music, talking with people who understood what it meant to feel lost. And for now, in this strange and wonderful place called the Cozy Mountain Inn, that was enough. On the third morning of James's stay at the inn, he woke to find that the world had transformed once again. The snow had melted slightly in the afternoon sun the day before, then frozen overnight, creating a landscape that glittered like it had been dusted with diamonds. The trees were encased in ice, and every branch caught the morning light and threw it back in 1,000 different directions. James dressed warmly and went downstairs to find the inn already bustling with activity. Eleanor was in the kitchen with Maggie, teaching her how to make the inn's signature cinnamon rolls. Maggie's sleeves were rolled up, and there was flour on her nose, but she was laughing, actually laughing, as Eleanor demonstrated the proper way to roll the dough. "Good morning, James," Eleanor called out. "We're making extra this morning. Mr. Peterson invited a friend to join us for breakfast." "A friend?" James asked, pouring himself coffee. "George Hadley," Mr. Peterson said, appearing in the doorway. "An old colleague from my teaching days. He retired up here about 10 years ago, lives just down the mountain. I called him yesterday and told him about Maggie's music. He's bringing his fiddle." Maggie looked up, startled. "His fiddle?" "George plays traditional folk music," Mr. Peterson explained. "Has for 50 years. I thought you two might enjoy playing together, if you're interested." A look of excitement crossed Maggie's face, quickly followed by nervousness. "I haven't played with anyone else in months. What if I'm rusty?" "Then you'll be rusty," Eleanor said matter-of-factly, sliding a tray of cinnamon rolls into the oven. "Music isn't about being perfect, dear. It's about connection. Now come help me set the table." Sarah emerged from the library where she'd apparently been working since dawn, her hair sticking up at odd angles and her eyes bright with the slightly manic look of someone deep in the creative flow. "I just wrote 3,000 words, she announced. 3,000 good words. I think I finally figured out what my novel is actually about." "What's it about?" James asked. Sarah poured herself coffee and sat down at the table with a satisfied sigh. "It's about a woman who spends her whole life trying to become someone else's version of successful, and then loses everything and has to figure out who she actually is. It's about finding yourself in the rubble of your broken dreams. She paused. I guess it's about all of us, really. Art usually is, Mr. Peterson said wisely. The most personal stories are the most universal. About 30 minutes later, they heard the sound of a truck pulling up outside. Biscuit ran to the door, tail wagging, and Eleanor opened it to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 70s with a weathered face and kind blue eyes. He had a shock of white hair and was carrying a worn violin case. George Hadley, as I live and breathe, Eleanor exclaimed, giving him a warm hug. It's been too long. Eleanor Gray, you get more beautiful every time I see you, George replied with a grin. He stamped the snow off his boots and came inside, bringing with him the smell of pine and cold air. Mr. Peterson made introductions, and George shook everyone's hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. When he got to Maggie, he held her hand a moment longer and looked at her with those perceptive blue eyes. Harold tells me you've got the gift, he said. Says you sing like an angel and play guitar like you were born with it in your hands. Maggie blushed. I don't know about that. Well, we'll find out soon enough, George said with a wink. After we eat, of course. Never play music on an empty stomach, that's my rule. Breakfast was a lively affair. George regaled them with stories from his teaching days. He'd taught music at the same high school where Mr. Peterson had taught English. He talked about students who'd gone on to become professional musicians, about the school band that had somehow made it to the state championships despite having only 12 members, about the time the entire brass section had gotten food poisoning right before the spring concert. Those were good years, George said, his expression growing wistful. But these years are good too. Different but good. I play my fiddle every day now, perform at the local pub on Friday nights, teach a few students who are interested in learning the old tunes. It's a simpler life, but it feels more honest somehow. After breakfast, they all moved to the library. George opened his violin case and lifted out a beautiful, well-worn fiddle. The wood glowed in the firelight, and James could see that it had been played and loved for many years. This was my grandfather's, George explained. He brought it from Ireland when he emigrated. It's been in the family for over 150 years. Maggie's eyes widened. My grandmother was from Ireland too. County Cork. County Clare for my family, George said with a smile. We're practically cousins. Now, let's see what you've got. Play me one of your songs. Maggie retrieved her guitar from her room and settled into a chair. She looked nervous, her fingers trembling slightly as she positioned the guitar. Then she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. She chose The Long Way Home, the song she'd written on the bus. Her voice started soft and uncertain, but grew stronger as she lost herself in the music. When she finished, George was nodding slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You've got it all right, he said. Real feeling, real heart. That's rarer than you might think. Now, do you know any of the old songs? The Parting Glass? Wild Mountain Time? My grandmother taught me Wild Mountain Time, Maggie said. But I haven't played it in years. Best time to play it again is now, George said. He lifted his fiddle and played a few notes, finding the key. When you're ready. Maggie started hesitantly, her fingers finding the familiar chords as if remembering an old friend. George joined in with the fiddle, weaving a melody around her guitar and voice. It was magic, the way the two instruments spoke to each other, the way George seemed to instinctively know when to lead and when to follow, how to complement Maggie's playing without overwhelming it. As they played, something shifted in the room. The music seemed to fill every corner, and James watched as Maggie's face transformed. The worry and doubt melted away, replaced by pure joy. This wasn't performing for industry executives or trying to fit into someone else's mold. This was music for the sake of music, played for people who were listening with their hearts. They played 3 more songs together, Black is the Color, The Water is Wide, and a lively reel that had everyone tapping their feet. By the end, Maggie was laughing and breathless, her eyes shining with an excitement James hadn't seen before. That was amazing, she said to George. I'd forgotten how good it feels to just play without worrying about whether it's commercial or marketable or any of that. That's the music business for you, George said, setting his fiddle down carefully. It takes something beautiful and tries to turn it into a product. But music isn't a product, girl. It's a conversation, a connection between souls. What you've got is too precious to waste on people who can't hear it properly. But what am I supposed to do with it? Maggie asked, the question that had been haunting her rising to the surface again. If I can't make a living with music, then what? Do I just give it up and get a normal job? Who says those are the only 2 options? Sarah interjected. Maybe there's a middle path. Maybe you don't have to be a superstar or give it up completely. Maybe you can find a way to keep music in your life while also being practical. George nodded in agreement. I know a woman down in the valley who teaches piano lessons during the week and performs at weddings on weekends. I know a man who works as a music therapist at the hospital and plays in a band on Friday nights. There are more ways to live a musical life than the one Nashville sells. But that feels like settling, Maggie said quietly. Like admitting I failed. Or, Mr. Peterson said gently, it's redefining what success means. You went to Nashville with one definition: fame, fortune, recognition. But what if success is actually being able to make music you love, with people who appreciate it, while also paying your rent and sleeping at night without anxiety eating you alive? Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. When I inherited this inn, people told me I should sell it and use the money to do something more exciting with my life. Travel the world, start a business in the city, whatever. But I love this place. I love the quiet life, the mountains, the simple joy of making people feel welcome. Was that settling? Or was it knowing myself well enough to choose what actually made me happy? James felt those words strike something deep inside him. He'd spent years chasing a version of success that looked good on paper, but felt hollow in his heart. He'd climbed and climbed, always thinking the next promotion, the next achievement would finally make him feel fulfilled. But it never did. I think I've been doing the same thing, he said, surprising himself by speaking. Chasing someone else's definition of success and calling it my own dream. The room fell quiet, everyone turning to look at him. He'd been so silent about his own story, listening to everyone else's struggles without fully sharing his own. I worked in corporate finance, James continued, the words coming slowly at first, then faster. Started right out of college. Worked my way up, got the promotions, made the money. On paper, I was successful. But I was miserable. I worked 80-hour weeks, missed every family event, had no friends outside of work, no hobbies, no life. I told myself it would be worth it eventually, that I'd reach some point where I could relax and enjoy it. But that point never came. There was always another goal, another milestone, another thing I had to achieve. What made you leave? Sarah asked softly. James took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, my father had a heart attack. He's okay now, but it scared me. I went to visit him in the hospital, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. I'd been too busy always. And I looked at him lying in that hospital bed, and I thought, what if that's me in 20 years? What if I spend my whole life working, and then wake up one day to realize I never actually lived? So you quit, Eleanor said, not as a question but as an understanding. So I quit, James confirmed. Walked out the next day. My boss thought I was having a breakdown. My colleagues thought I was crazy. Maybe I am. I had no plan, no backup, no idea what I was going to do next. I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. Mr. Peterson leaned forward in his chair. And how do you feel now, 3 weeks later? James thought about it carefully. Terrified, he admitted. But also lighter? Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but at least now I have the space to figure it out. That's all any of us can ask for, George said. The space to figure it out. You young people, and yes, you're all young to me, you think you need to have everything figured out right now. But life is long, and it's winding, and the path changes. The best thing you can do is stay true to yourself and be willing to adjust course when something isn't working. They talked for hours that morning, the conversation flowing easily from music to dreams to life choices to regrets and hopes. George told them about his decision to leave teaching and move to the mountains, about the year he'd spent questioning whether he'd made a terrible mistake, about the slow realization that he'd actually made the best decision of his life. The hardest part, George said, was letting go of who I thought I was supposed to be. I was a teacher. That was my identity for 40 years. When I retired, I didn't know who I was anymore. It took time to discover that I was George, and being George was enough. I didn't need a title or a role to have value. How did you figure that out? Maggie asked. George smiled. By doing what you're doing right now. By sitting still long enough to listen to myself. By trying things and seeing what felt right. By giving myself permission to change my mind, to experiment, to fail without it meaning I was a failure. As lunchtime approached, George reluctantly packed up his fiddle. I need to head back, he said. But Maggie, I want you to come down to the pub this Friday night. Play a few songs with me. Nothing fancy, Just some folks who appreciate good music. You game?" Maggie hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes. Yes, I'd like that." "Good," George said. He shook hands with everyone and gave Eleanor another warm hug. "Thank you for breakfast, as always. This old inn and its keeper have a way of bringing the right people together at the right time." After George left, the afternoon stretched before them, lazy and peaceful. Mr. Peterson went to paint, Sarah returned to her writing, and Eleanor bustled about the inn, humming to herself as she worked. James found himself in the library again, but this time instead of reading, he pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. He started writing, not a resume or a cover letter, but simply his thoughts. What did he actually enjoy doing? What made him feel alive? What kind of life did he want to build? The answers surprised him. He'd spent so long defining himself by his career that he'd forgotten he was more than that. He liked helping people. That's why he'd enjoyed helping Eleanor around the inn. He liked solving problems, but creative problems, not just financial ones. He liked quiet mornings and good conversations, and the feeling of being part of a community. Maybe he thought he didn't need to find another high-powered job in the city. Maybe there were other ways to use his skills, other ways to build a life that actually felt like living. He was still writing when Maggie poked her head into the library. "Hey," she said softly. "Want to take a walk? I need some air, and Biscuit looks like he could use the exercise." James saved his notes and stood up. "Sure. Let me grab my coat." They bundled up and headed outside with Biscuit leading the way, his tail wagging with joy at the prospect of an adventure. The ice-covered world sparkled around them, and their boots crunched on the frozen snow as they followed the path James had taken his first day at the inn. For a while, they walked in comfortable silence. Then Maggie spoke. "Thank you for sharing your story this morning. It helped, hearing that someone else is just as lost as I am." "We're all lost," James said. "That's what I'm learning here. Everyone at the inn is trying to find their way. Even Eleanor, in her own way." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked. James thought about it. "She's devoted her whole life to taking care of other people. But I wonder sometimes who takes care of her. Who makes sure she's okay?" Maggie nodded slowly. "You're right. We should do something nice for her. All of us." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," Maggie said. "But I'll think of something." They walked on, and James felt grateful for this strange, unexpected friendship, for this place that had brought them together, for the gift of time to heal and discover and begin again. The next few days at the inn settled into a gentle rhythm that felt almost timeless. James woke each morning to sunlight streaming through his window, had breakfast with the others, and spent his days in quiet contemplation mixed with helpful tasks around the inn. He fixed a leaky faucet in one of the guest bathrooms, helped Eleanor organize the storage room, and even learned how to make her famous vegetable soup. Maggie had truly come alive since George's visit. She practiced her guitar every morning, and in the afternoons, she helped Eleanor in the kitchen, learning recipes that had been passed down through generations. The inn was frequently filled with music now. Sometimes Maggie's original songs, sometimes the old folk tunes her grandmother had taught her, and sometimes just gentle instrumental pieces that drifted through the rooms like a soft breeze. Sarah had found her groove with her novel, and was writing with a fervor that James found both inspiring and slightly intimidating. She'd share excerpts sometimes in the evening, reading passages aloud to the group gathered by the fire, and James was continually amazed by her talent, by the way she could capture human emotion in just a few perfectly chosen words. Mr. Peterson continued his daily painting routine, often inviting others to join him on his morning expeditions. James had gone with him twice now, sitting quietly while the old man worked, learning to see the landscape through an artist's eyes, the way light played on snow, the subtle gradations of color in what appeared to be simply white, the stark beauty of bare branches against a winter sky. It was Thursday afternoon when Eleanor made an announcement at lunch. "I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies," she said. "Would anyone like to come along? It's about a 30-minute drive, and the town is quite charming. There's a little bookstore, a few cafes, the general store where I get most of my provisions." "I'll go," Sarah said immediately. "I need some new notebooks. I'm going through them faster than I expected." "Me too," Maggie added. "I want to pick up some new guitar strings before Friday night." "James?" Eleanor asked. "What about you?" James hesitated. He hadn't left the inn's property since he'd arrived, and part of him wanted to stay in this peaceful bubble. But another part of him knew he couldn't hide forever. "Sure," he said. "I could use some fresh air and a change of scenery." "Wonderful," Eleanor said. We'll leave around 10 o'clock. Mr. Peterson, will you hold down the fort? Of course, Mr. Peterson replied. Biscuit and I will keep everything running smoothly. That evening, Maggie approached James and Sarah with a conspiratorial look. I've been thinking about what we talked about, doing something nice for Eleanor. I have an idea, but I'll need your help. They gathered in Maggie's room, and she explained her plan. Friday night, after I get back from playing at the pub with George, I want to have a special dinner here at the inn. A thank you dinner for Eleanor. We'll cook, we'll set a beautiful table, and we'll all share what this place has meant to us. What do you think? I love it, Sarah said immediately. I can write something like a toast or a speech. And I can help with the cooking, James offered. Eleanor's been teaching me. I'm not great, but I can follow a recipe. Perfect, Maggie said, her eyes bright with excitement. Tomorrow while we're in town, we can get everything we need. We just have to keep it a secret from Eleanor. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and the four of them, Eleanor, James, Sarah, and Maggie, piled into Eleanor's old pickup truck for the drive to town. The road wound down the mountain through pine forests and past frozen streams, and James found himself relaxing into the journey, enjoying the conversation and laughter that filled the cab. The town of Pine Ridge was exactly as Eleanor had described it, charming in that authentic, unpretentious way that small mountain towns often are. The main street was lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s, and everything was decorated with pine garlands and white lights left over from the holidays. Eleanor parked in front of the general store. I'll be about an hour getting supplies, she said. Why don't you all explore? There's a cafe called the Mountain Bean that makes excellent coffee, and the bookstore is just down the street. Meet back here at noon. They agreed and split up, with Sarah heading immediately for the bookstore, Maggie toward a music shop she'd spotted, and James deciding to explore the town on foot. He wandered down the main street, taking in the small shops, a hardware store, a clothing boutique, a gallery featuring local artists, a real estate office. He paused in front of the real estate office, looking at the listings in the window. Small cabins for sale, parcels of land, a few larger homes. His eye caught on one listing in particular, a small storefront available for lease, right here on Main Street. Ideal for cafe, bookstore, or office space, the description read. James stared at it for a long moment, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Before he could think too hard about it, he pushed open the door and walked inside. A woman in her 50s looked up from her desk with a warm smile. Good morning. I'm Patricia Moore. Can I help you with something? The storefront on Main Street, James heard himself say. The one available for lease. Can you tell me more about it? Patricia's smile widened. Of course. It's a wonderful space. The previous tenant was a yarn shop, but the owner retired and moved to Florida. It has good bones, large windows, a back room for storage or office space. Are you thinking of starting a business here? I'm not sure, James admitted. I'm just looking. Can I see it? Absolutely, Patricia said, grabbing a set of keys. Let me lock up here and I'll take you over. The storefront was 3 doors down from the real estate office. Patricia unlocked it, and they stepped inside. It was empty now, but James could see the potential immediately. Large windows let in abundant natural light. The wooden floors were beautiful despite needing refinishing, and there was indeed a spacious back room. The rent is quite reasonable, Patricia said, launching into the details. The landlord is flexible and would consider a shorter lease if you wanted to try it out. What kind of business were you thinking about? James walked around the space, his mind racing. I'm not entirely sure yet, he said honestly, but I used to work in finance. I'm good with numbers, with helping people solve problems. Maybe some kind of consulting service? Helping small businesses or individuals with financial planning, budgeting, that sort of thing. Even as he said it, the idea crystallized. Not high-stakes corporate finance, but practical, helpful work for ordinary people. The kind of work that made a real difference in someone's life. There's definitely a need for that here, Patricia said enthusiastically. A lot of folks in mountain communities struggle with financial literacy. The nearest financial planner is 40 miles away in the next town over. You'd be providing a real service. I need to think about it, James said, but his heart was beating faster with something that felt dangerously like excitement. Of course, Patricia said, handing him her card. Take all the time you need. But I will say, good spaces don't stay available long in Pine Ridge. It's a growing community. James thanked her and stepped back outside, his mind whirling. Could he really do this? Leave behind his entire life in the city and start over in a small mountain town? It seemed crazy. It seemed impulsive. It seemed perfect. He walked to the Mountain Bean and ordered coffee, sitting by the window to watch the town go by. People greeted each other on the street, stopped to chat, moved with an unhurried ease that was so different from the frantic pace of city life. A man helped an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car. A mother with 2 small children in tow paused to let them pet a friendly dog. It was simple. It was real. James pulled out his phone and did something he'd been avoiding for days. He checked his bank account. He had savings, more than he'd thought actually. He'd been living so frugally, working so much that he'd never had time to spend money. He could afford to take a chance, at least for a while. James. He looked up to see Maggie and Sarah coming into the cafe, bags in hand. "We got everything for the dinner," Maggie said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Plus some extras. There's an amazing little shop that sells handmade soaps and candles. We got some for the table." Sarah set her bags down with a happy sigh. "I found 3 new notebooks and a vintage typewriter that I absolutely didn't need, but absolutely had to have. The bookstore owner is shipping it to my apartment." She paused, studying James's face. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," James said slowly. "Maybe a future. I don't know. Can I tell you something crazy?" "We specialize in crazy here," Maggie said with a grin. "Lay it on us." James told them about the storefront, about his idea for a financial consulting business, about the wild impulse to actually consider staying in Pine Ridge. He expected them to tell him he was being ridiculous, that he was making decisions too quickly, that he should think it through more carefully. Instead, Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Do it." "What?" "Do it," she repeated. "I've known you for less than a week, but I've watched you come alive here. You're a different person than the one who arrived last Sunday. You laugh now. You help people. You seem happy. Why would you go back to a life that was making you miserable?" "Because it's insane," James said. "I have no plan, no clients, no idea if this would even work." "So," Maggie said, "I went to Nashville with a guitar and a dream and no backup plan. It didn't work out the way I thought it would, but I learned so much. I grew so much. And now I'm here, and I'm figuring out a different path. That's not failure, James. That's life." "But what if I fail?" James asked, voicing his deepest fear. "Then you fail," Sarah said matter-of-factly, "and you figure out what's next. But what if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? Which regret would be worse?" James sat back, letting their words sink in. They were right. He'd spent so long playing it safe, following the prescribed path, doing what he was supposed to do. Where had it gotten him? Burned out, miserable, and so disconnected from himself that he'd had to literally run away to remember who he was. "I need to think about it more," he said finally. "But yeah, maybe I will do it." They met Eleanor back at the truck at noon, all of them loaded down with bags. Eleanor raised an eyebrow at the amount they were carrying, but didn't ask questions. On the drive back to the inn, James stared out the window at the passing landscape, seeing it with new eyes now. Not as a temporary refuge, but as a potential home. That afternoon, while Eleanor was busy with laundry, James, Sarah, and Maggie huddled in the kitchen to plan the special dinner. They decided on a menu: roasted chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, a salad with Eleanor's homemade vinaigrette, and for dessert, an apple pie that James would attempt to make using Eleanor's mother's recipe. "We'll do it tomorrow night," Maggie said. "I'll be back from the pub by 8, and we can have dinner at 8:30. Mr. Peterson is in on it too. I talked to him this morning. He's going to keep Eleanor occupied while we set everything up." That evening at dinner, George called to confirm the plan for the next night. Maggie's hands shook slightly as she held the phone, nervous excitement written all over her face. 7 o'clock, she said after hanging up. "He wants me there at 7 to warm up." "I'm terrified." "You're going to be wonderful," Eleanor said firmly. "Those people at the pub are lucky to hear you play." "Will you come?" Maggie asked suddenly. "All of you?" "I think I'll be less nervous if I have friendly faces in the crowd." "Wouldn't miss it," Mr. Peterson said. "Absolutely," Sarah agreed. "I'll be there," James promised. Eleanor smiled. "I suppose I can close the inn for one evening. It's not like we're overrun with guests." Maggie beamed, and James felt a surge of affection for this makeshift family they'd created. A week ago, they'd all been strangers. Now they were something more, a group of people who had found each other in their brokenness and were helping each other heal. That night, James lay in bed in room 7, listening to the familiar creaks of the old and settling, and thought about the future for the first time in days. Not with anxiety or dread, but with cautious, fragile hope. Maybe he would lease that storefront. Maybe he would build a new life here in the mountains. Maybe he would fail spectacularly. But maybe, just maybe, he would succeed in ways he'd never imagined. Friday morning arrived with a fresh snowfall that blanketed the world in pristine white. James woke early, his mind already turning over the plan for the evening. He had never been much of a cook, but Eleanor had been patient in teaching him, and he was determined to make this dinner special. He found Eleanor already in the kitchen, as always, preparing breakfast. Biscuit lay in his usual spot by the hearth, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "Good morning, James," Eleanor said warmly. "You're up early today." "Couldn't sleep," James admitted, pouring himself coffee. "Too much on my mind, I guess." Eleanor studied him with those perceptive eyes of hers. "Good thoughts or worried thoughts?" "Both," James said with a small laugh. "Mostly good, which is new for me." They worked together in comfortable silence to prepare breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh fruit. As they cooked, James found himself memorizing these simple moments: the peaceful rhythm of working alongside Eleanor, the warmth of the kitchen, the way morning light filtered through the windows. "Eleanor," he said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Have you ever been afraid to take a chance on something? Even when you knew in your heart it was the right thing to do?" Eleanor paused in her stirring and looked at him. "Every single day of my life," she said quietly. "When I inherited this inn, I was terrified. I had a good job in the city, a comfortable life. Taking over the inn meant leaving all of that behind, moving to the mountains, being responsible for keeping this place alive. Everyone told me I was crazy. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," Eleanor confirmed. "Because some things are worth being afraid for. Some things call to us so strongly that not answering would be a greater tragedy than failing." She set down her spoon and turned to face him fully. "What's calling to you, James?" James told her about the storefront in Pine Ridge, about his idea for the financial consulting business, about the strange but powerful feeling that he was meant to stay here, to build a life in these mountains. Eleanor listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she smiled, a smile that held both understanding and approval. "You should do it," she said simply. "Just like that? You think I should upend my entire life based on a feeling?" "Not just a feeling," Eleanor corrected. "Based on a week of watching yourself come back to life. Based on discovering work that would actually mean something to you. Based on finding a place where you fit. James, some people search their whole lives for what you found here. Don't let fear talk you out of it." Before James could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs, and Maggie appeared in the doorway, looking pale and nervous. "I barely slept," she confessed. "I keep thinking about tonight. What if I freeze up? What if people don't like my music? What if? What if the sky falls and the mountains crumble?" Eleanor interrupted gently but firmly. "Maggie, dear, you can't live your life by what-ifs. You're going to go to that pub tonight, and you're going to play your beautiful music, and people are going to love it. And even if they don't, even if it's terrifying and uncomfortable, you'll survive it. You'll be okay." Maggie took a shaky breath and nodded. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just been so long since I performed for anyone other than you all." "That's why we'll all be there," James said. "You won't be alone." Mr. Peterson and Sarah joined them for breakfast, and the conversation turned to lighter topics. Mr. Peterson's latest painting, Sarah's novel progress, Biscuit's heroic battle with a squirrel he'd spotted from the window. But underneath the casual chat, James could feel the anticipation building. Tonight would be important for all of them, though for different reasons. After breakfast, Maggie retreated to her room to practice, and James spent the morning helping Mr. Peterson repair a section of the porch railing that had come loose. As they worked, the old man hummed to himself, occasionally offering bits of wisdom disguised as casual observations. "You know," Mr. Peterson said as he hammered a nail, "I've lived a lot of years, seen a lot of people make a lot of decisions. The ones who regret their choices the most aren't the ones who tried and failed. They're the ones who never tried at all." James smiled. "Did Eleanor tell you? About the storefront?" "She might have mentioned it," Mr. Peterson said with a twinkle in his eye. "For what it's worth, I think you'd do well here. This community needs people like you, people with skills and heart. And you need this community. Some matches are just meant to be." That afternoon, James attempted to bake the apple pie for Eleanor's dinner. He followed the recipe card she'd given him, written in faded ink in her mother's handwriting. The process was meditative, peeling apples, mixing the crust, carefully arranging everything just so. When he slid it into the oven, he felt a small surge of pride. Sarah wandered into the kitchen and perched on a stool. "Smells amazing," she said. "You're getting good at this domestic stuff." "Who knew?" James said with a laugh. "A month ago, I was living on takeout and protein bars. And now you're baking pies in a mountain inn," Sarah said. "Life is strange." "Speaking of strange," James said, "have you thought about what you'll do when you finish your novel?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I have, actually. I've been here almost a month now, and I've written more in this time than I did in the entire previous year. I think I need to find a way to hold on to this peace, this creativity. I can't go back to my old apartment, to the life I had before. It wasn't working. What will you do instead?" "I'm thinking about asking Eleanor if I can stay on for another month or two," Sarah admitted. "I can pay rent, and I could help out around the inn. There's something about this place that feeds my creativity. And honestly, I like it here. I like the rhythm of the days, the community we've built, the feeling of being part of something." "I get that," James said softly. "I really do." As evening approached, the energy in the inn shifted. Maggie changed into a dark green dress that brought out the red in her hair, and she spent 20 minutes tuning her guitar with shaking hands. Mr. Peterson put on a clean shirt and his nicest cardigan. Sarah did her makeup carefully, which James had never seen her do before. Even Biscuit seemed to sense the occasion, staying close to everyone as if offering moral support. They piled into Eleanor's truck and Mr. Peterson's old sedan at 6:30, giving themselves plenty of time to get to the pub. The drive down the mountain was quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts. James sat in the back of the truck with Sarah, watching the darkening sky and the lights of Pine Ridge appearing in the valley below. The pub was called the Mountain Tavern, and it was exactly the kind of place James had imagined: weathered wood, a stone fireplace, mismatched furniture that looked comfortable and well-loved. When they arrived, George was already there, setting up chairs and adjusting the small sound system in the corner. "There she is," George called out when he saw Maggie. "Right on time. Come on, let's get you set up." The pub was already starting to fill with people, locals by the look of them, people who knew each other and greeted George with familiar warmth. James and the others found a table near the front, and Eleanor ordered a round of drinks from a woman behind the bar who clearly knew her well. "Eleanor Gray," the bartender called out. "Haven't seen you in months. How's life at the inn?" "Busy and beautiful," Eleanor replied. "Jenny, these are my current guests. We're here to support our friend Maggie. She's playing tonight with George." Jenny's face lit up. "Oh, wonderful." George mentioned he'd found a new musical partner. "We're excited to hear her." As 7 o'clock approached, the pub filled until nearly every seat was taken. James felt his own nervousness building for Maggie. He could see her in the corner with George, her guitar in hand, her face pale but determined. George stepped to the microphone and tapped it gently. "Evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this cold Friday night. I've got a special treat for you, a talented young musician who's going to join me for a few songs. Please welcome Maggie Sullivan." There was warm applause as Maggie took her place on the small stage beside George. She adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling slightly, and James saw her take a deep breath. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm a bit nervous, so please bear with me. This first song is one my grandmother taught me. It's called The Parting Glass." She began to play, and from the first note, the room fell silent. Her voice, tentative at first, grew stronger as she lost herself in the music. George joined in with his fiddle, and together they created something magical, a sound that seemed to reach into the chest and touch the heart directly. James watched the faces around him. People had stopped talking, stopped drinking, stopped everything to listen. An elderly woman in the corner wiped tears from her eyes. A young couple held hands across their table. Even the bartender had paused mid-pour, transfixed. When the song ended, there was a moment of profound silence, and then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping. It was genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Maggie's face transformed, a smile breaking through her nervousness like sun through clouds. They played 5 more songs, a mix of traditional folk tunes and 2 of Maggie's originals. With each song, Maggie's confidence grew, and James could see her remembering why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. This wasn't about impressing industry executives or fitting a commercial mold. This was about connection, about sharing something beautiful with people who were ready to receive it. For her final song, Maggie chose The Long Way Home. She introduced it simply. "This is a song I wrote recently, during a difficult time. It's about getting lost and finding that sometimes the wrong path leads you exactly where you need to be." As she sang, James felt the words resonating with his own journey. He glanced around the table at his companions, Sarah with tears streaming down her face, Mr. Peterson smiling with pride, Eleanor watching with the expression of a mother seeing her child succeed. They were all on their own long ways home, all trying to find where they belonged. When Maggie finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, whistling and cheering. George pulled her into a warm hug, and James could see her crying with joy and relief and the overwhelming emotion of being truly heard. After the performance, people crowded around to congratulate Maggie, to tell her how beautiful her music was, to ask when she'd be performing again. George beamed like a proud uncle, introducing her to everyone, already planning their next performance. "You were incredible," Sarah told Maggie when she finally made it back to their table. "I mean truly, truly incredible. I've been to concerts at fancy venues in the city, and none of them moved me like you did tonight." "She's right," Mr. Peterson added. "You have a rare gift, Maggie. The kind that can't be taught or manufactured. You touched every person in this room." Maggie looked overwhelmed, happy tears still streaming down her face. "I'd forgotten," she said. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to play for people who actually listen, who actually care. In Nashville, everything was so transactional, so focused on whether I could make it. But this is why I fell in love with music. This connection, this moment of shared beauty." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You found your way back to yourself. That's worth celebrating." They stayed at the pub for another hour, soaking in the warm atmosphere and the celebration. George announced that Maggie would be joining him for a regular Friday night set, and the crowd cheered. Several people asked if she gave lessons, if she had recordings they could buy, if she'd consider playing at weddings or private events. On the drive back to the inn, Maggie was radiant, talking excitedly about the evening, about the people she'd met, about the possibilities that had opened up. "George says there's a music school in town that's looking for a guitar teacher," she said. "And someone asked if I'd consider playing at the farmer's market in the summer. And there's a wedding in June that might need a musician." "See," Eleanor said gently, "a musical life doesn't have to look like what Nashville sold you. It can look like this, teaching, playing for your community, sharing your gift in ways that feel authentic to you." "I think I might stay," Maggie said suddenly. "Not at the inn forever. I know I need to find my own place eventually. But in Pine Ridge, I think I could build a life here." "Is that crazy?" "Not even a little bit," James said, and he meant it. When they got back to the inn, it was nearly 9 o'clock. Maggie was still buzzing with energy, but the others were ready to wind down. James caught Sarah's eye and gave a small nod toward the kitchen. It was time to put their plan into action. "Eleanor," Mr. Peterson said smoothly, "would you help me with something in the library? I can't quite reach a book on the top shelf." Eleanor looked slightly suspicious but followed him, and the moment she was out of sight, James, Sarah, and Maggie sprang into action. They pulled the prepared food from where they'd hidden it in the pantry, lit candles, set the table with Eleanor's best dishes, and created a centerpiece with pine boughs and the handmade candles they'd bought in town. Sarah had written a card that read simply, "To Eleanor, who reminds us all that home isn't a place, it's a feeling. Thank you for sharing yours with us." They worked quickly and quietly, and within 15 minutes, everything was ready. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the food was warming in the oven, and the table looked beautiful. "Mr. Peterson," James called, "you can bring her back now." They heard footsteps, and then Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she took in the scene before her. "What is all this?" she whispered. "A thank you," Maggie said softly, "for taking us in, for giving us space to heal, for helping us remember who we are. We wanted to do something special for you." Eleanor looked around at each of them, at these people who had been strangers just days ago, and were now something much more precious. "Oh, my dears," she said, her voice breaking. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," James said firmly. "You've done so much for all of us. Please sit. Let us take care of you for one evening." They guided Eleanor to the head of the table, and then they brought out the food. The roasted chicken that Maggie had prepared under Eleanor's earlier tutelage, the vegetables James had roasted, the salad Sarah had assembled, and fresh bread that Mr. Peterson had picked up from the bakery in town that morning. As they ate, they took turns sharing what the inn had meant to them. Mr. Peterson talked about how it had given him a place to grieve and eventually to heal after his wife's death. Sarah spoke about finding her creative voice again in the peaceful surroundings. Maggie described how Eleanor's kindness had helped her remember why she loved music. And James, somewhat haltingly, explained how the inn had given him permission to stop running and start living. Eleanor listened to it all with tears streaming down her face, occasionally reaching out to squeeze someone's hand. "You all think you came here by accident," she said finally. "But I don't believe in accidents. I think people find their way to the cozy mountain in exactly when they need to. And you've given me as much as I've given you. You've reminded me why I do this, why I keep the inn open even when it's hard, why this work matters." For dessert, James brought out his apple pie. It wasn't perfect, the crust was a bit lopsided, and he'd clearly been heavy-handed with the cinnamon. But when Eleanor took her first bite, she smiled with genuine delight. "It's perfect," she said, "because you made it with love, and that's what matters most." They lingered around the table long after the food was gone, talking and laughing, sharing stories and dreams. Biscuit made his rounds, receiving scratches and scraps from everyone. The candles burned low, and the fire in the nearby hearth crackled softly. Around midnight, they finally began to disperse to their rooms. As James climbed the stairs to room 7, he felt a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. A week ago, he'd been lost, desperate, running from a life that had stopped making sense. Now he had direction, purpose, and, perhaps most surprising of all, hope. He lay in bed, listening to the old and settle around him, and thought about the storefront in Pine Ridge, about Maggie's performance at the pub, about Sarah's novel coming to life, about Mr. Peterson's quiet wisdom, about Eleanor's boundless kindness. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call Patricia Moore and ask about leasing the storefront. Tomorrow, he would take the first real step toward building a new life. But tonight, he would simply be grateful for this place and these people who had helped him find his way back to himself. Saturday morning brought a stillness to the inn that felt almost sacred. The exhilaration of the previous night had settled into a peaceful contentment, and everyone seemed to move a little slower, as if savoring the quiet joy of the moment. James woke to find snow falling again, thick flakes drifting past his window in lazy spirals. He dressed warmly and made his way downstairs, where he found Eleanor alone in the kitchen, sipping tea and staring out the window with a contemplative expression. "Morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Eleanor turned and smiled. "Good morning, James. Coffee's fresh. I was just thinking." "About last night?" "About many things," Eleanor said. "About how this old inn keeps working its magic, generation after generation. About how I'm getting older, and sometimes wonder what will happen to this place when I'm gone. About how grateful I am for moments like last night that remind me why I do this." James poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "Have you ever thought about retiring? Selling the inn?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "I've had offers over the years. Developers who want to turn it into a luxury resort, investors who want to modernize it. But this place isn't meant to be a resort. It's meant to be a refuge. A pause. A breath between one life and the next. If I sold it to the wrong people, it would lose its soul." "What about family? Is there anyone who might want to take it over?" Eleanor shook her head. "I never married, never had children. I have nieces and nephews scattered around the country, but they have their own lives. None of them have ever shown interest in the inn. When I'm gone, I suppose it will be sold to whoever wants it, and I can only hope they'll understand what makes it special." The sadness in her voice touched James deeply. He thought about the inn's 100-year history, about all the people it had helped, about the legacy of kindness and sanctuary that Eleanor's family had built. The thought of it being lost felt wrong somehow. Before he could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs, and Maggie appeared, followed shortly by Sarah and Mr. Peterson. The kitchen filled with the comfortable morning bustle. Coffee being poured, breakfast being prepared, Biscuit making his rounds for head scratches. As they cooked together, pancakes this morning, with fresh blueberries and real maple syrup, Maggie announced that George had called earlier. "He wants to know if I'd be interested in playing at a community fundraiser next month. They're raising money for the volunteer fire department." "That's wonderful," Sarah exclaimed. "See, you're already becoming part of the community." "I know," Maggie said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's happening so fast. Yesterday I was a failed musician with nowhere to go, and today I have opportunities, connections, a place where people actually want to hear me play. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream," Mr. Peterson said wisely. "It's what happens when you stop trying to force your life into someone else's vision and start living authentically. The right opportunities find you when you're being true to yourself." Over breakfast, James made an announcement that had been building inside him since he woke up. "I'm going to do it," he said. I'm going to call Patricia Moore on Monday and ask about leasing that storefront. I'm going to start a financial consulting business here in Pine Ridge." The table erupted in excited congratulations, but James held up a hand. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "I've never run my own business. I don't know if there's really enough demand for my services. I could fail spectacularly." "You could," Eleanor agreed calmly. "Or you could succeed beyond your wildest dreams. But you'll never know unless you try. And James, I've watched you this week. You're good with people, you're thoughtful, you're capable. This community needs someone like you." "I'll be your first client," Sarah announced suddenly. "I have a decent advance from my publisher for this novel, but I have no idea how to manage it responsibly. I need someone to help me figure out savings, taxes, all that grown-up stuff I've been avoiding." "Me too," Maggie added. "I need to figure out how to budget now that I might actually have multiple income streams. Teaching, performing, maybe recording someday. I have no idea how to handle any of that." "See," Mr. Peterson said with a smile. "You already have clients. You're already helping people. That's how it starts." After breakfast, James retreated to his room and called Patricia Moore. His heart pounded as he listened to the phone ring, and he almost hung up before she answered. Patricia Moore speaking. "Hi, Patricia. This is James Mitchell. I came to see the storefront on Main Street yesterday." "Of course." "James, hello. Have you made a decision?" James took a deep breath. "I'd like to lease it. Can we set up a time to discuss terms?" Patricia's voice brightened. "Absolutely. How about Monday morning? Say 10 o'clock at my office?" "That works perfectly," James said, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. After he hung up, he sat on the edge of his bed for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. He was really doing this. He was leaving behind his old life and building something new. It was the most frightening and exciting thing he'd ever done. He called his parents next, something he'd been putting off all week. His mother answered on the second ring. "James, we've been so worried. You just disappeared after quitting your job. Where are you?" "I'm in a small town in the mountains," James said. "At an inn." "I'm okay, Mom. Better than okay, actually. I'm good." He told them about the inn, about the people he'd met, about his idea for the business. His parents were quiet as he talked, and James braced himself for their objections. "James," his father said finally, his voice gruff with emotion, "I'm proud of you." James was stunned. "You are?" "I am. Your mother and I have been talking since my heart attack. About priorities, about what really matters. We've been worried about you for years, watching you work yourself into the ground, but we didn't know how to say anything. We thought you wanted that life. But this sounds like you're actually living." "I thought you'd think I was crazy," James admitted. "Maybe a little," his mother said with a watery laugh. "But it's a good kind of crazy. The kind that comes from following your heart instead of just your head. We're behind you, sweetheart. Whatever you need." After the call, James felt lighter than he had in years. He'd been carrying the weight of his parents' expectations, real or imagined, for so long. Having their support felt like permission to fully embrace this new path. That afternoon, the snow continued to fall, and the group gathered in the library with books and journals and comfortable silence. James pulled out his laptop and began researching what he'd need to start his business: licensing requirements, insurance, accounting software, marketing strategies. It was overwhelming, but it was also energizing in a way his old job had never been. Sarah was typing away at her novel, occasionally reading passages aloud for feedback. Mr. Peterson sketched in his pad, working on preliminary drawings for a series of paintings he wanted to do featuring the inn in different seasons. Maggie practiced guitar softly, working on a new song she'd started writing that morning. Eleanor moved through the room periodically, bringing tea and cookies, stoking the fire, simply being present in her quiet, nurturing way. Biscuit rotated between them, giving each person their turn for attention before moving on to the next. "This is nice," Sarah said during a lull in the typing. "Just being together, everyone working on their own thing but still connected. I never had this in the city. I was always alone, even when I was surrounded by people." "That's because you were surrounded by the wrong people," Mr. Peterson said. "Or perhaps you were the wrong version of yourself. Sometimes we have to lose our way to find the people we're meant to journey with." As evening approached, Eleanor announced that she was making her famous beef stew for dinner. "It needs to simmer for a few hours," she said. "Perfect for a snowy evening." James volunteered to help, and as they worked together in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and browning meat, Eleanor asked him about his business plans. "I want to offer services for ordinary people, James explained. Not wealthy investors or corporations, but families and small business owners who need help with budgeting, retirement planning, basic financial literacy. Maybe I could even offer classes at the community center or the library. That's exactly what this area needs, Eleanor said approvingly. So many people struggle financially not because they don't work hard, but because they were never taught how to manage money effectively. You could make a real difference. That's what I'm hoping for, James said. I spent years making rich people richer. I want to do something that actually matters now. You will, Eleanor said with quiet confidence. I can see it in you. You're meant for this. Dinner that evening was a cozy affair. The group gathered around the table, while snow piled up outside, and the stew warmed them from the inside out. The conversation wandered from topic to topic: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams for the future, ridiculous hypothetical questions that made everyone laugh. If you could have dinner with any person, living or dead, who would it be? Maggie asked at one point. My wife, Mr. Peterson said without hesitation. I'd want one more evening with her, to tell her all the things I never said, to thank her for the life we built together. The table fell quiet, the weight of his words settling over them. She'd be proud of you, Eleanor said softly, for how you've lived since she's been gone, for finding joy again, for helping others like you've helped all of us. Mr. Peterson's eyes were bright with tears, but he smiled. I hope so. I like to think she sent me to this in a way. She always said I needed to remember how to live, not just exist. What about you, Eleanor? Sarah asked. Who would you want to have dinner with? Eleanor thought for a long moment. My grandmother, she said finally. The one who built this inn. I'd want to tell her that her legacy lives on, that the sanctuary she created is still helping people all these years later. I'd want her to know that her dream didn't die. She'd be proud of you too, James said. You've honored her vision beautifully. After dinner, they moved to the library, and Maggie brought her guitar. I want to play you the new song I've been working on, she said. It's not finished, but I'd like your feedback. She settled into a chair and began to play. The song was called The Inn at the End of the Road, and it was about finding sanctuary when you've lost your way, about the kindness of strangers who become family, about learning that home is where you're understood. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It's beautiful, Sarah whispered. It's all of us. It's this place. I want you to have it, Maggie said, looking at Eleanor. When I record it someday, I want the proceeds to go toward maintaining the inn. It's my way of giving back, of making sure this place can keep helping people long after we're all gone. Eleanor was crying openly now, and she pulled Maggie into a tight embrace. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing this place, for understanding what it means. They stayed up late that night, talking and laughing, and occasionally falling into comfortable silences. Outside, the snow continued to fall, adding to the already substantial accumulation. The world felt very far away, and this small group in this old inn felt like the entire universe. Eventually, one by one, they drifted off to bed. James was the last to go, staying to help Eleanor bank the fire and turn off the lights. As they worked, she turned to him suddenly. James, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay, he said, curious. When you get your business up and running, when you're established here in Pine Ridge, would you consider serving on the board of a nonprofit I'm thinking about creating? A foundation to preserve the inn and ensure it continues its mission long after I'm gone. James was stunned. You'd trust me with that? I would, Eleanor said. You have the financial expertise, you understand the heart of what this place is about, and I believe you'll still be here, part of this community, for many years to come. I need people I can trust to protect the inn's legacy. I think you're one of those people. I'd be honored, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Truly honored. Eleanor smiled and patted his hand. Good. We'll talk more about it as your plans take shape. But I wanted you to know that you're not just passing through here, James. You're becoming part of something larger. Part of the inn's story. As James climbed the stairs to room 7 that night, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A week ago, he'd been lost and desperate. Now he had purpose, community, and a future he could actually look forward to. The cozy mountain inn had given him what he'd needed most, a place to stop running and start becoming. He fell asleep to the sound of snow whispering against his window and dreamed of the life he was about to build. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night. James woke to a world transformed into a winter wonderland, everything buried under nearly 2 feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the brilliant sunshine. The sky was that particular shade of deep blue that only comes after a storm, and the air, even through the closed window, felt crisp and clean. He dressed and went downstairs to find Mr. Peterson already up, standing on the front porch with his sketch pad, working to capture the morning light on the snow-covered landscape. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" the old man said without looking up from his drawing. "Days like this remind me why I fell in love with these mountains." James stood beside him, sipping his coffee and watching the world slowly wake up. A deer emerged from the tree line, picking its way carefully through the deep snow. Birds flitted between the branches, sending small cascades of snow to the ground below. "Can I ask you something?" James said after a while. "Of course. How did you know it was time? To retire, to leave teaching, to completely change your life?" Mr. Peterson set down his pencil and looked out at the mountains. "I didn't, not really. After Margaret died, I kept teaching because it was familiar, because it gave my days structure. But one morning, I woke up and realized I was just going through the motions. I wasn't really teaching anymore. I was just showing up. The students deserved better, and so did I." "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Mr. Peterson admitted. "I'd been a teacher for 40 years. It was my entire identity. Who was Harold Peterson if not a teacher? It took me a long time to figure out that I was just Harold, and that was enough. The painting helped, gave me something to be terrible at, which was oddly freeing." James laughed. "You're not terrible." "I'm mediocre at best," Mr. Peterson said with a grin. "But that's the point. I paint because I enjoy it, not because I need to be great at it. That's something I never understood when I was younger, that we're allowed to do things simply because they bring us joy." They were interrupted by Eleanor calling them in for breakfast. She'd made a special Sunday spread, homemade waffles with whipped cream and berries, crispy bacon, and fresh squeezed orange juice. The table looked festive, almost celebratory. "What's the occasion?" Sarah asked as she came down the stairs, her hair still damp from the shower. "It's Sunday," Eleanor said simply, "and we're all here together. That's reason enough to celebrate, don't you think?" Maggie was the last to join them, looking refreshed and peaceful. "I slept better last night than I have in months," she said. "Maybe years. I think I finally stopped running from everything and just let myself be." Over breakfast, they made plans for the day. The snow was too deep for much hiking, but Mr. Peterson suggested they could snowshoe around the property if anyone was interested. Eleanor mentioned that she needed to clear the walkways and paths, and James immediately volunteered to help, with Sarah and Maggie joining in. After breakfast, they bundled up in coats and boots and gloves, and Eleanor produced several snow shovels from the storage shed. For the next 2 hours, they worked together to clear the main walkway, the porch, and the path to the parking area. It was hard work, and they were all breathing heavily and red-cheeked by the time they finished. But there was something deeply satisfying about the physical labor, about working together toward a common goal, about seeing the clear paths emerge from the deep snow. They stopped periodically for snowball fights and to help Biscuit, who bounded through the snow with more enthusiasm than efficiency, occasionally disappearing completely into a drift and needing to be rescued. "I can't remember the last time I had this much fun," Sarah said, laughing as she brushed snow off her coat after a particularly well-aimed throw from Maggie. "In the city, snow was just an inconvenience, something to complain about. Here, it's magical." "That's because you're living in it instead of just enduring it," Eleanor observed. She stood on the porch, watching them with a warm smile, holding a thermos of hot chocolate. "Come warm up. You've all earned a break." They gathered on the porch, passing around the thermos and watching the mountains. The silence was comfortable, the kind that comes from people who've grown to understand each other without needing constant conversation. "I've been thinking," Mr. Peterson said eventually, "about what happens when we all leave here. How we stay connected." The question hung in the air, and James realized he'd been avoiding thinking about it. The idea of leaving the inn, of this group dispersing, filled him with an unexpected sadness. "I'm not going anywhere," Maggie said. "I mean, I'll leave the inn eventually. I need to find my own place. But I'm staying in Pine Ridge. This is home now. I'm planning to stay on at the inn for at least another 2 months," Sarah added. "And even after that, I think I'll look for a place nearby. I can write anywhere, and I want it to be here." "And James is opening his business right in town," Eleanor said, looking at him with knowing eyes. "So we won't be losing each other. We're becoming neighbors, a real community." "What about you, Mr. Peterson?" Maggie asked. "Will you keep coming back?" "Every autumn, like clockwork," he promised. "This place has become essential to me. And now, with all of you here, even more so. Besides, someone needs to make sure James doesn't work himself into the ground in his new business. James felt a swell of emotion. He'd arrived at the inn alone and lost, and somehow, in just over a week, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a family. Not by blood, but by choice and circumstance, and the mysterious alchemy that brings certain souls together at the right moment. That afternoon, while the others rested indoors, James borrowed Eleanor's truck and drove into Pine Ridge. The roads had been plowed, though they were still treacherous in places, and the drive took longer than usual. He needed to see the storefront again, to stand in that empty space and truly envision his future there. The town was quiet on Sunday afternoon, most businesses closed. James parked in front of the storefront and got out, peering through the large windows. In his mind's eye, he could see it all: a simple desk and chairs for consultations, a bookshelf with financial literacy resources, maybe a small waiting area with comfortable seating. Nothing fancy, nothing corporate. Just a welcoming space where people could come for help without feeling judged or intimidated. He pulled out his phone and started making notes. He'd need furniture, a computer, a printer, business cards, basic office supplies. The list grew longer as he thought through everything, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed. Then he remembered what Eleanor had said: take it one step at a time. Admiring your new place? James turned to find an older man standing behind him, bundled in a thick coat and wool cap. He had a friendly face, weathered by years and sun, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. I'm leasing it, James said. Planning to open a financial consulting business. Are you now? The man extended a gloved hand. I'm Thomas Whitfield. I own the woodworking shop 2 doors down. James shook his hand, the name registering. Thomas Whitfield? You carved the bear sign at the Cozy Mountain Inn. Thomas's face lit up. I did indeed. 20 years ago now. You staying at Eleanor's place? I am. She told me your story. Thomas chuckled. Did she tell you I arrived there a broken man and left with a new life? That inn has a way of working miracles. Looks like it's doing it again with you. It certainly feels that way, James admitted. Financial consulting, you said? Thomas rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You know, I've been running my business for 20 years and still don't really understand all the tax implications and retirement planning nonsense. I could use someone to help me make sense of it all. I'd be happy to help, James said, surprised and pleased. Once I'm officially open, of course. You've got yourself a client then, Thomas said, and I'll spread the word. There are a lot of small business owners in this town who could use your services. Pine Ridge looks after its own, and if Eleanor sent you our way, that's good enough for most folks. They chatted for a few more minutes, and Thomas gave James his card before heading off. As James drove back to the inn, he felt a growing sense of rightness. This was where he belonged. This was what he was meant to do. When he returned to the inn, he found everyone gathered in the library again. Sarah was reading aloud from her novel, a scene where the protagonist has to choose between returning to her old life or embracing the uncertain new one she'd been building. The parallels to their own lives weren't lost on anyone. That's exactly it, Maggie said when Sarah finished. That moment when you have to decide, do I go back to what's safe and familiar even though it was killing me, or do I step into the unknown and trust that I'll figure it out? The hardest part is accepting that there's no going back, not really, Mr. Peterson added. Even if you physically return to your old life, you're not the same person anymore. Once you've seen that there's another way to live, you can't unsee it. Eleanor brought in tea and homemade cookies, settling into her usual chair. I've watched hundreds of people make that choice over the years, she said. Some choose the unknown and build beautiful new lives. Others choose the familiar and spend years wondering what if. Both are valid choices, but only one leads to growth. What if you choose the unknown and fail? Sarah asked quietly. What if you take the leap and fall flat on your face? Then you fall, Eleanor said simply. And you pick yourself up and you try again. Or you try something different. Failure isn't the end of the story. It's just a plot twist. The only real failure is never trying at all. James thought about his meeting scheduled for the next morning with Patricia Moore, about the business he was about to start, about all the ways it could go wrong. Then he thought about the alternative, going back to his old job or finding another one just like it, spending his life making money for other people while slowly dying inside. When he framed it that way, the choice was obvious. I met Thomas Whitfield in town today, he announced. He's already offered to be a client, and he said he'd spread the word about my services. Thomas, Eleanor exclaimed. How wonderful. He's well respected in the community. If he vouches for you, others will follow. That evening, Eleanor made a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, and they ate by candlelight, the atmosphere intimate and warm. The conversation drifted to childhood memories, each person sharing stories of their younger selves, the dreams they'd had, the fears they'd carried, the moments that had shaped them. Maggie told them about learning to play guitar from her grandmother, about summer evenings on the porch singing the old songs, about feeling like the music connected her to something larger than herself. Sarah shared about her love of stories from an early age, about how she'd filled notebook after notebook with tales, about her parents' disappointment when she'd chosen writing over law. Mr. Peterson spoke about meeting his wife in college, about their 40 years together, about how she'd encouraged his painting even when he insisted he had no talent. And James found himself talking about his father's heart attack, about the moment in the hospital when he'd realized he was living the wrong life, about the terrifying freedom of walking away from everything he'd built. Eleanor listened to it all, nodding and smiling and occasionally wiping away tears. "You're all so brave," she said finally. "Braver than you know. It takes courage to admit when something isn't working, to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be, to step into the unknown. I'm honored that you've all done that work here, under my roof." "This place made it possible," James said. "You made it possible, Eleanor. You created a space where we could stop pretending everything was fine and just be honest about our struggles. That's a rare gift." After dinner, Maggie played guitar while the others sat by the fire, and James felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties. But tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be, surrounded by people who understood, who cared, who were on their own journeys of transformation. As the evening wound down and people began drifting to their rooms, Eleanor caught James's arm. "Walk with me for a moment," she asked. They stepped out onto the porch, where the cold night air was sharp and clear. The stars were brilliant overhead, unobscured by city lights, and the snow-covered landscape glowed faintly in the moonlight. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said. "About 20 years ago, I almost sold the inn. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, questioning whether I was making any difference. A developer made me an excellent offer, and I seriously considered taking it." "What stopped you?" "Thomas Whitfield," Eleanor said with a soft laugh. "He'd been here for 6 months by then, barely speaking, clearly broken. And one morning, I found him in the workshop out back, carving. He'd found some old tools of my father's and some scrap wood, and he was creating something beautiful. When I asked him about it, he said, 'This place gave me back my hands. I can't let you close it.' So you kept it because of him?" "I kept it because he reminded me why it mattered," Eleanor corrected. "One person, one life changed. That was enough. And then there have been so many others over the years. And now there's you and Maggie and Sarah and Mr. Peterson coming back year after year. This has been my life's work, and there have been times when I wondered if it was enough. But yes, it has been enough." James understood what she was telling him. "Your legacy is people," he said. "Not the building, not the business. It's the lives you've touched, the people you've helped, the transformations you've witnessed. And now you'll carry that forward," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "Through your business, through your work with the foundation, through simply being part of this community. You'll help people the way I've tried to help people. That's how legacies continue, not through buildings or money, but through people who understand what really matters and dedicate themselves to it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars and listening to the quiet sounds of the mountain night. Then Eleanor yawned and declared it was time for bed. James remained on the porch for a few more minutes, thinking about legacy and purpose and the unexpected ways life can transform when you stop resisting and start allowing. He thought about the man who had arrived at this in just over a week ago, exhausted, lost, running from a life that had stopped making sense. That man was gone now, or at least he was changing into someone new. Someone who understood that success wasn't measured in salary and promotions, but in peace and purpose and connection. Someone who was brave enough to build a life on his own terms, even if it meant starting from scratch. James took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, feeling it fill his lungs and clear his mind. Tomorrow, he would sign the lease and take the first official step toward his new life. Tomorrow, his real work would begin. But tonight, under the stars, wrapped in the quiet magic of the cozy mountain inn, he simply gave thanks for the unexpected journey that had led him here, to this moment, to this transformation, to this new beginning. Monday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire inn. James woke early, his stomach fluttering with nervous energy. Today was the day he would officially commit to his new life, signing the lease on the storefront and taking the first concrete step toward building his business. He dressed carefully in one of the few professional outfits he'd brought with him, dress pants and a button-down shirt, though he left off the tie. This was a new chapter, and he wanted to look professional without feeling like he was putting on the costume of his old life. Downstairs, he found Eleanor already preparing breakfast, and to his surprise, the entire group was up early, gathered in the dining room as if this were a special occasion. "We wanted to see you off on your big day," Sarah explained, grinning. "First day of your new life deserves a proper send-off." Eleanor had made a special breakfast, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and mimosas. "A toast," she said, raising her glass. "To James, who had the courage to walk away from what wasn't working and the wisdom to build something better. May your business thrive, may your heart stay open, and may you always remember that you have a home here at this inn." They clinked glasses, and James felt his eyes prickle with tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "All of you. I don't know if I would have had the courage to do this without you." "You would have," Mr. Peterson said firmly. "The courage was always there. We just helped you remember it." After breakfast, James gathered his things, his laptop, a folder with notes about his business plan, the card Patricia Moore had given him. As he headed toward the door, Maggie called out, "Wait." She ran to her room and returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to give you something for good luck. Open it later when you're alone." James hugged her, then hugged everyone else, even Biscuit, who seemed to sense the significance of the moment. Then he climbed into his car, the same car that had brought him to the inn over a week ago, though he was a completely different person now, and headed down the mountain toward Pine Ridge. The meeting with Patricia Moore went smoothly. She had the lease agreement ready, and they went over the terms carefully. The rent was reasonable, the lease was for 1 year with an option to renew, and James could move in immediately. "The previous tenant left the space clean and in good condition," Patricia explained. "You'll need to make it your own, of course, but structurally it's sound. When do you think you'll open for business?" James thought about it. "I need to get furniture, set up the office, get my licensing in order, do some marketing. Maybe 3 weeks? A month? Take your time and do it right," Patricia advised. "This community appreciates quality over speed. And speaking of which, I'd like to be your client too. My husband and I have been talking about retirement planning, and we could use some professional guidance." James signed the lease with a hand that only trembled slightly, and Patricia handed him the keys. They were old-fashioned brass keys, heavy and substantial in his palm. He closed his fingers around them and felt a surge of emotion. This was real. He was really doing this. After leaving Patricia's office, James walked down Main Street to the storefront, his storefront now. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the space seemed different knowing it was his. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the potential he'd seen from the beginning. He stood in the center of the empty room and slowly turned in a circle, envisioning how it would look. A desk here, chairs there, maybe some plants in the corners, bookshelves along that wall. Simple, professional, welcoming. A place where people would feel comfortable coming for help. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How'd it go?" James smiled and typed back, "I signed the lease. It's official. I'm a business owner." His phone immediately began buzzing with congratulatory messages from the entire group. Maggie sent a string of celebration emojis. Mr. Peterson texted, "Proud of you, son." Even Eleanor, who rarely texted, managed to send, "Well done. Come home when you're ready." Home. The inn had become home in such a short time, and James felt grateful for that sanctuary, even as he took steps toward independence. He spent another hour at the storefront, taking measurements and making notes about what he'd need. Then he visited the hardware store down the street, where the owner, a gruff but friendly man named Bill, immediately asked if he was the fellow opening the financial consulting business. "Word travels fast," James said with a laugh. "Small town," Bill replied with a shrug. "Thomas Whitfield mentioned you. Said you were Eleanor Gray's people, which means you're good people. What can I help you with?" James explained what he needed: paint for the walls, basic repairs, some shelving. Bill walked him through the store, offering advice and suggestions, and by the time James left, he had a trunk full of supplies and another potential client. "My daughter's getting married next year," Bill had said as James was checking out. "Her fiancé has student loans, and they're trying to figure out how to buy a house while managing that debt. Could you help them?" "Absolutely," James had assured him. "That's exactly the kind of situation I want to help people with." As James drove back to the inn, he felt a sense of rightness settling over him. This was what he was meant to do, not managing millions for wealthy investors, but helping ordinary people navigate the financial challenges of everyday life. It felt meaningful in a way his old work never had. When he arrived back at the inn, he was greeted like a returning hero. Eleanor had baked a celebratory cake, and they all gathered in the dining room for an impromptu party. James told them about signing the lease, about meeting Bill at the hardware store, about the growing list of potential clients. "It's happening so fast," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "A week ago I had nothing. Now I have a business, clients, a community. It doesn't seem real." "It's real because you made it real," Sarah said. "You took action. That's what turns dreams into reality. Not wishing, not hoping, but doing." After they'd eaten cake and the celebration had wound down, James remembered Maggie's gift. He excused himself and went up to room 7, sitting on the bed and carefully unwrapping the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden carving, a bear like the one on the inn's sign, but smaller and more intricate. The bear was sitting peacefully, its eyes closed, looking serene and content. Underneath was a small plaque that read, "Find your peace. Rest when needed. Remember you're stronger than you know." James turned the carving over and found an inscription on the bottom. "For James, who found his way home. MS." He sat there for a long moment, holding the carving and feeling the weight of all the changes that had happened in such a short time. A week ago, he'd been running from his life. Now he was running towards something better. The difference was profound. There was a knock on his door, and Mr. Peterson's voice called, "May I come in?" "Of course," James said, quickly wiping his eyes. "Good," Mr. Peterson said, smiling. "Because none of us should have to navigate life alone anymore. We found each other for a reason, and I think we're meant to stick together." That evening, the 5 of them, James, Eleanor, Mr. Peterson, Sarah, and Maggie, gathered in the library for what Eleanor called a family meeting. Biscuit sprawled in the center of the room, as if presiding over the proceedings. "We've been talking," Eleanor began, "about the future, about what happens next for all of us, and for the inn. I think it's time we made some plans, set some intentions, and committed to this community we've built." They spent the next 2 hours talking through ideas. Mr. Peterson and James would work together to establish the foundation for the inn, with Sarah helping to write the mission statement and organizational documents. Maggie offered to organize fundraising concerts, using her growing connection to the local music community. They discussed bringing in more people who might benefit from the inn's sanctuary, creating workshops and retreats, maybe even starting a small scholarship fund for artists and writers. "What we're really talking about," Sarah said at one point, "is creating a model for how people can support each other through life's transitions. The inn is the physical space, but the real magic is the community, the relationships, the way we help each other grow." "Exactly," Eleanor said, her eyes bright. "That's exactly it. My grandmother started this to give travelers a place to rest. But it became so much more than that. It became a place of transformation. I want to ensure that continues, that grows, that reaches more people." As the evening wore on, they refined their plans and made commitments. James would handle the financial and legal aspects of the foundation. Mr. Peterson would serve as the primary liaison with Eleanor, helping with day-to-day decisions. Sarah would document the inn's history and create materials to share its story. Maggie would build connections with the artistic community and organize events. "We're building something beautiful," Maggie said softly. "Something that will outlast all of us." "That's what legacy is," Eleanor replied. "Not what we leave behind, but what we build that continues to grow after we're gone." Later that night, as James was getting ready for bed, his phone rang. It was his father. "James, I've been thinking about what you said, about your new business. Your mother, and I want to invest." James was stunned. "Dad, you don't have to." "I know we don't have to," his father interrupted. "We want to. Consider it our way of supporting your dream, of making up for all the years we pushed you toward a career that wasn't right for you. We believe in you, son. We want to help." James had to sit down, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," he managed. "That means more than you know." "We're proud of you," his father said. "Really proud. You had the courage to change your life when it wasn't working. That's not easy, but it's necessary. We should have done more to support you before. We're doing it now." After the call, James lay in bed thinking about how much his life had changed in such a short time. He'd lost everything he thought defined him, and in doing so, he'd found everything he actually needed. He'd found purpose, community, support, and most importantly, himself. Through the window, he could see the mountains silhouetted against the starry sky. Somewhere down in the valley, the town of Pine Ridge slept, unaware that one of its newest residents lay awake planning how to serve it better. And here at the inn, for other souls were also settling in for the night, each on their own journey but bound together by the mysterious grace that had brought them all to the same place at the same time. James closed his eyes, feeling deeply grateful. Tomorrow, he would start painting his office. The day after that, he'd order furniture. Next week, he'd officially register his business name. He'd decided on Mountain Financial Partners, practical guidance for real life. But tonight, he simply rested in the knowledge that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, surrounded by exactly the people he was meant to know. The cozy mountain inn had worked its magic once again, taking someone broken and helping them become whole. And in return, James and the others would ensure that the inn could continue that sacred work for generations to come. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and transformation. James threw himself into preparing his office, waking early each morning to drive into Pine Ridge and work on the space. He painted the walls a warm, welcoming cream color, assembled furniture that arrived in flat boxes, and organized his materials and resources. Eleanor had insisted he continue staying at the inn until he found a permanent place to live, and James was grateful for the ongoing support. Each evening, he'd return to the inn tired but energized, sharing his progress over dinner with the others. Maggie had performed at the pub every Friday night and was quickly becoming a beloved fixture in the Pine Ridge music scene. She'd also started teaching guitar lessons 3 afternoons a week at the community center, and her calendar was filling up with students of all ages. "I have 10 students now," she announced one evening, her face glowing with pride. 10. And the community center is paying me, and I'm getting paid for the pub performances, and someone asked me to play at their anniversary party next month. I'm actually making a living with music, just not the way I thought I would. Sarah had made tremendous progress on her novel and was talking with her agent about the manuscript. "She says it's the best thing I've ever written," Sarah told them, looking both thrilled and terrified. "She thinks publishers are going to love it. The story of finding yourself in the ruins of your broken dreams. Apparently, that resonates with people." "Of course it does," Mr. Peterson said. "Because it's the truth. That's what good art does. It tells the truth in a way that helps people see their own lives more clearly." Mr. Peterson himself had completed a series of paintings featuring the inn in different lights and seasons. He'd hung them in the inn's hallway, and they added a warmth and beauty that made the space feel even more like home. Eleanor had been moved to tears when she saw them. "You've captured it perfectly," she'd told him. "Not just what the inn looks like, but what it feels like. That's a rare gift." 2 weeks after signing the lease, James stood in his completed office and felt a surge of satisfaction. The space had transformed from an empty storefront into a professional, welcoming environment. His desk sat near the window, where he could see Main Street and the mountains beyond. Comfortable chairs faced the desk for client meetings. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with financial planning resources and personal finance books that he planned to lend to clients. A small seating area with a couch and coffee table occupied another corner, a casual space for less formal conversations. On the wall behind his desk, he'd hung a wooden sign that Thomas Whitfield had carved for him as a welcome to the community gift. It read, "Mountain Financial Partners," with a small mountain range carved beneath the words. Next to it hung Maggie's carved bear, a reminder of where this journey had begun. Patricia Moore stopped by to see the finished space and nodded approvingly. "It's perfect, James. Professional but not intimidating. People are going to feel comfortable coming here." "That's the goal," James said. "I want people to feel like they can ask any question without being judged, like financial planning is something accessible, not just for the wealthy." "When's your official opening?" "Next Monday," James said, feeling a flutter of nerves and excitement. "I'm having a small open house, just putting out some refreshments and inviting people to stop by, see the space, learn about my services. Eleanor is making cookies, and Maggie offered to play guitar for an hour or so." "I'll be there," Patricia promised. "And I'll spread the word. You're going to do great, James. I can feel it." That evening, James returned to the inn to find Eleanor in the kitchen with a woman he didn't recognize. She was in her early 50s, with graying blonde hair and a weary expression that James had come to recognize, the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. "James," Eleanor said warmly, "this is Catherine Barnes. She arrived this afternoon. Catherine, this is James Mitchell. He's been staying here for about 2 weeks now. Nice to meet you, James said, extending his hand. Catherine shook it with a grip that was surprisingly firm. Eleanor was just telling me that you're opening a financial consulting business in town. That's quite a leap. It is, James agreed. But sometimes leaps are necessary. Something in his words seemed to resonate with Catherine, and she nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. Over dinner that evening, they learned Catherine's story. She had been a nurse for 25 years, working in a busy hospital in the city. She was good at her job, dedicated, and respected by colleagues. But 6 months ago, she'd started experiencing panic attacks at work. The stress, the long hours, the constant exposure to suffering had finally become too much. I took a leave of absence, Catherine explained quietly. Told myself I just needed a break, that I'd go back refreshed. But every time I think about returning to the hospital, I feel like I can't breathe. My therapist suggested I take some time away to really think about what I want, not just what I think I should do. And so you came here, Eleanor said gently. A friend told me about this place, Catherine said. Said it was where people go when they need to figure things out. I didn't know what else to do, so I came. James saw his own journey reflected in Catherine's story. The same exhaustion, the same sense of being trapped, the same desperate need to escape and find clarity. You're in the right place, he assured her. I was in a similar situation 2 weeks ago. This inn has a way of helping people find their way. After dinner, while Eleanor showed Catherine to her room, the others gathered in the library. James told them about his upcoming open house, and they all immediately offered to help. I can make some promotional flyers and post them around town, Sarah suggested. And I'll write a blog post about you. I've been blogging about my time here, and I've actually built up a decent following of people interested in small-town life and career transitions. I'll play for 2 hours instead of 1, Maggie offered. And I'll invite all my students and their families. That alone should bring in 20 people. I'll come early and help set up, Mr. Peterson said. And I'll bring some of my paintings to hang on the walls. Give the space some color and warmth. James felt overwhelmed by their support. You don't have to do all this. Yes, we do, Sarah said firmly. That's what family does. We show up for each other. You've been cheering us on. Now it's our turn to cheer for you. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah designed and printed beautiful flyers that James posted around town. Word spread through the community with surprising speed. The barista at the Mountain Bean mentioned it to customers. Bill at the hardware store told everyone who came through his door, and Thomas Whitfield apparently told half the town. James also spent time getting to know Catherine. She'd join him in the mornings for coffee, and they'd talk about their respective journeys. She was still wrestling with the decision of whether to return to nursing or to leave the profession entirely. I feel like a failure, she confessed one morning. I spent 25 years building this career, and now I can't even walk into a hospital without having a panic attack. What does that say about me? It says you're human, James replied. It says you gave everything you had until you had nothing left to give. That's not failure, Catherine. That's just reaching the end of what's sustainable. But nursing is who I am, she protested. If I'm not a nurse, then who am I? James smiled, recognizing the question. That's exactly what I asked myself 2 weeks ago. I was a financial analyst. That was my entire identity. Losing that job felt like losing myself. But I'm learning that I'm not my job. The job was just something I did. I'm still me. I'm James, and I get to decide what comes next. How did you figure out what comes next? Catherine asked. I listened, James said simply. To myself, to the people around me, to what felt right instead of what looked right on paper. And I gave myself permission to try something different, even if it might not work out. Catherine was quiet for a long time. I've always wanted to be a school nurse, she finally said. Working with kids at a slower pace, without the trauma and intensity of hospital work. But it would be a significant pay cut, and I'd have to get additional certification, and I kept telling myself it was impractical. But would it make you happy? James asked. I think it might, Catherine admitted, her eyes filling with tears. I think it really might. Then maybe it's not impractical, James suggested. Maybe it's essential. On Sunday, the day before his open house, James woke with butterflies in his stomach. This was really happening. Tomorrow, he would officially open his business, and his new life would truly begin. Eleanor made a special Sunday breakfast, her famous cinnamon rolls, eggs, bacon, and fresh fruit. The entire house gathered, including Catherine, who seemed lighter than she had when she'd arrived. I've made a decision, Catherine announced during breakfast. I'm going to pursue school nursing. I looked into it yesterday, and there's a certification program I can complete online over the summer. And there's actually an opening at the elementary school in Pine Ridge. They've been looking for a nurse since the previous one retired. Catherine, that's wonderful, Eleanor exclaimed. It feels right, Catherine said, smiling genuinely for the first time since she'd arrived. Scary but right. And I have you all to thank for helping me see it clearly. The inn worked its magic again, Mr. Peterson said with a wink. After breakfast, everyone drove into Pine Ridge to help James with final preparations for the open house. They cleaned the office until it sparkled, arranged chairs, set up the refreshment table, hung Mr. Peterson's paintings, and made sure everything was perfect. Maggie set up her guitar and amp in the corner, doing a sound check. Sarah arranged the promotional materials artfully on a side table. Eleanor directed everything with the calm efficiency of someone who had been hosting people for decades. As they worked, other people stopped by to see what was happening. Bill from the hardware store brought a plant as a congratulations gift. Thomas Whitfield stopped in to admire the space. The barista from the Mountain Bean brought a gift certificate for free coffee. One by one, members of the community dropped by to welcome James and wish him well. This town takes care of its own, Thomas told him. You're one of us now, whether you plan to be or not. That evening, back at the inn, they all gathered for a quiet dinner. Tomorrow would be busy and exciting, but tonight was for rest and reflection. I want to say something, James said as they finished eating. 2 weeks ago, I came to this inn as a complete mess. I'd walked away from my entire life with no plan, no direction, no idea what I was doing. I was lost and scared and full of doubt. He looked around the table at each of them. You all helped me find my way. You showed me that it's possible to start over, to build something new, to create a life that actually feels worth living. Eleanor, you gave me sanctuary and wisdom. Mr. Peterson, you showed me that it's never too late to change. Sarah, you reminded me that courage looks like action. Maggie, you taught me that failure in one thing can lead to success in another. And Catherine, even though we've only known each other a few days, you've reminded me why this work matters, because everyone deserves support during life's transitions. His voice grew thick with emotion. I don't know if my business will succeed. I don't know if I'll make enough money, or if I'll have enough clients, or if this will all work out the way I hope. But I do know that I'm doing the right thing, living the right way, being the right version of myself. And that's because of all of you. So thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. There wasn't a dry eye at the table. Eleanor stood and came around to hug James, and then everyone else joined in, creating a group embrace that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Tomorrow, Eleanor said, her voice full of emotion, you're going to open your doors and begin serving this community. You're going to help people, James. You're going to make a real difference. And we're going to be there cheering you on, today and always. That night, James lay in bed in room 7 for what he knew would be one of the last times. He'd found an apartment to rent in Pine Ridge, a small one-bedroom above the bookstore on Main Street. He'd be moving in at the end of the week, beginning the next phase of his journey. But he would always be grateful for this room, this inn, this moment in time when everything changed. The Cozy Mountain Inn had been more than a place to stay. It had been a cocoon, a safe space for transformation, a sanctuary where broken pieces could be gathered and reassembled into something new and whole. As he drifted off to sleep, James thought about all the people who had passed through these doors over the 100 years the inn had stood. How many other lives had been transformed here? How many other souls had found their way? The inn had witnessed countless stories of loss and renewal, of endings and beginnings, of people brave enough to change. And now James's story was woven into that tapestry, one more thread in the rich fabric of the inn's history. He had arrived lost and was leaving found. He had arrived broken and was leaving whole. He had arrived alone and was leaving with a family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new stories. But tonight, wrapped in the peace of the Cozy Mountain Inn, James simply rested in gratitude, ready for whatever came next. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself was blessing James's new beginning. He woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep, and found Eleanor already in the kitchen preparing a special breakfast. "Big day," she said with a warm smile. "You'll need a good meal to start it right." They worked together in the familiar rhythm they developed over the past 2 weeks, and soon the others began filtering down. Even Catherine appeared, looking more rested than she had since arriving. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," she said when James expressed surprise at seeing her up so early. "I want to see you launch this dream." Over breakfast, they went over the plan for the day. The open house would run from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Maggie would play from 11 to 1. Eleanor had prepared enough cookies and refreshments for an army, insisting that it was better to have too much than too little. First impressions matter, she said. People should walk in and immediately feel welcomed, cared for, and valued. At 9 o'clock, they all piled into their various vehicles and drove into Pine Ridge. The morning was crisp and cold, but the sun was shining, and Main Street looked picturesque with its brick buildings and mountain backdrop. When James unlocked the door to his office, he felt a surge of pride and purpose. This was his. He had built this, and today he would officially open for business. They spent the next hour making final preparations. Eleanor arranged cookies on platters with the precision of an artist. Mr. Peterson adjusted the paintings on the walls. Sarah set out business cards and brochures. Maggie tuned her guitar and ran through a few practice songs. Catherine helped wherever she was needed, seeming grateful to be part of something positive and forward-looking. At exactly 10 o'clock, James turned the sign on the door to open and stepped back, taking a deep breath. "Here we go," he said. For the first 15 minutes, no one came, and James felt his anxiety building. What if no one showed up? What if all this preparation was for nothing? But Eleanor placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Have faith," she said quietly. "Trust the process." At 10:20, the door opened, and Patricia Moore walked in with her husband, a tall man with a kind face. "We wanted to be your first official visitors," Patricia said. "Michael, this is James Mitchell, the financial consultant I told you about." They were followed shortly by Bill from the hardware store with his daughter and her fiancé. Then Thomas Whitfield arrived with 2 other woodworkers from his shop. The barista from the Mountain Bean came during her break. And then, like a dam breaking, people began streaming in. By 11 o'clock, when Maggie began playing, the office was full of people, some there for the refreshments and music, others genuinely interested in James's services. He found himself in conversation after conversation, explaining his approach to financial planning, listening to people's concerns and challenges, exchanging business cards, and scheduling appointments. "I've been trying to figure out how to save for retirement on a teacher's salary," one woman told him. "Every financial advisor I've talked to before seemed only interested in people who already had money to invest." "That's exactly who I want to help," James assured her. "Regular people with real financial challenges. Let's set up a time to talk about your situation specifically." A young couple approached, nervous and uncertain. "We just had our first baby," the man explained, "and we're realizing we have no idea how to plan for things like college savings or life insurance or any of that. We don't have a lot of money, but we want to be responsible." James scheduled them for later in the week, and their relief was palpable. "Thank you," the woman said. "We were afraid to ask anyone because we thought they'd judge us for not having our finances together." "No judgment here," James promised. "Just practical guidance. That's what I'm here for." Throughout the morning, James caught glimpses of his friends supporting him. Eleanor was in constant motion, making sure everyone had coffee or cookies, making people feel welcome. Mr. Peterson was talking to a group of retirees about his own experience with financial planning in retirement. Sarah was documenting everything on her phone, taking photos and notes for her blog. Maggie's music created a warm, inviting atmosphere that made the whole event feel less like a business opening and more like a community gathering. And Catherine, to James's surprise, seemed to have found her element. She was talking to a woman with a young child, offering comfort and advice about some medical concern. James overheard her mention that she was planning to become a school nurse, and the woman's face lit up. "We desperately need a good nurse at the elementary school," the woman said. "My daughter is diabetic, and the temporary nurse they have now doesn't really understand how to manage it. Would you be interested in applying?" James smiled, watching Catherine exchange contact information with the woman. The inn's magic was still working, connecting people who needed each other, creating opportunities where none had existed before. By 1 o'clock, James had scheduled 15 appointments for the coming weeks. He'd handed out dozens of business cards, talked to what felt like half the town, and begun to feel like a real part of the Pine Ridge community. "This is exactly what I hoped would happen," he told Eleanor during a brief, quiet moment. "Not just getting clients, but connecting with people, becoming part of something larger than myself." "That's what makes a life meaningful," Eleanor replied. "Not what we accumulate, but what we contribute. Not what we achieve, but who we help." The open house officially ended at 2, though people lingered, reluctant to leave the warm, welcoming atmosphere. By 3, the last guests had departed, and James's little group began cleaning up. "That was incredible," Sarah said, dumping paper plates in the trash. "I counted. You had at least 50 people come through here. For a small town, that's amazing." "The whole community showed up," Maggie added. "That's how you know you're doing something right. People could feel that you genuinely care about helping them." As they finished cleaning, Thomas Whitfield returned, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing it to James. "But I wanted to wait until the crowd was gone." James unwrapped it carefully and found a beautiful wooden plaque. Carved into it were the words, "Success is not measured by what we gain, but by what we give. Welcome to the community, James. The people of Pine Ridge." Below the words were dozens of signatures. Everyone who had attended the open house had apparently signed it. James felt his eyes fill with tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Thomas replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep helping people. Keep being part of this community. That's all we ask." After Thomas left, James hung the plaque on the wall next to his desk, where he would see it every day. A reminder of why he was doing this work, of the community that had embraced him, of the new life he was building. They locked up the office and headed back to the inn as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. James drove slowly, savoring the beauty of the landscape, feeling deeply grateful for the journey that had brought him here. That evening, Eleanor prepared a celebratory dinner, pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, and a chocolate cake for dessert. As they ate, they recounted the highlights of the day, laughing at funny moments and marveling at how well everything had gone. "I have an announcement," Catherine said during dessert. "I applied for the school nursing position this afternoon. They're expediting the interview process, and I meet with the principal on Thursday." "That's wonderful," Maggie exclaimed. "And," Catherine continued, "I've decided to stay in Pine Ridge, regardless of whether I get the job. I'll find something else if it doesn't work out. But this town feels right. This community feels like somewhere I could heal and rebuild." "Another soul saved by the Cozy Mountain Inn," Mr. Peterson said with a smile. "Not saved," Catherine corrected gently. "Helped, guided, supported. The inn didn't save me. It gave me the space and peace to save myself." "That's the most accurate description I've ever heard," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "The inn doesn't fix people. It just holds space for them to fix themselves." After dinner, James announced that he had something he wanted to share. He'd been working on it for several days, refining it with Sarah's help, and now felt ready to present it. He pulled out a folder and passed around copies of a document. "This is the mission statement for the foundation we've been discussing. I wanted to get everyone's input before we finalize it." They read in silence. "The Cozy Mountain Inn Foundation is dedicated to preserving and expanding the century-old mission of the Cozy Mountain Inn, to provide sanctuary, support, and space for people navigating life's difficult transitions. We believe that everyone deserves a place to pause, reflect, and gather strength for the journey ahead. Through the inn's hospitality, community support, and programs focused on healing and transformation, we aim to help people rediscover their path and rebuild their lives with purpose and authenticity." "It's perfect," Sarah said softly. "It captures everything the inn is and does." "I have some suggestions for programs we could offer," Mr. Peterson added. "Writing workshops for Sarah to lead, music therapy sessions with Maggie, financial literacy classes with James. We could create a holistic support system." They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, their excitement building as they envisioned what the foundation could become. They talked about offering scholarships for people who couldn't afford to stay at the inn, creating partnerships with therapists and counselors, hosting seasonal retreats focused on specific life transitions like career changes, retirement, loss, or creative renewal. "This could really be something special," Eleanor said, her eyes shining. "Something that outlasts all of us and continues helping people for generations." "We'll need to fundraise," James noted. "But I think with Maggie's concerts, Sarah's writing platform, Mr. Peterson's paintings, and my business connections, we can build something sustainable." "And I can help," Catherine offered. "Once I'm established here, I can contribute both time and resources. This place has given me so much. I want to give back." As the evening wound down, James felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He'd started the day opening his business, and he was ending it helping to create something even larger, a foundation that would ensure the inn's mission continued indefinitely. Before bed, he took a walk around the inn's property with Biscuit trotting beside him. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were brilliant overhead. He stood in the spot where he'd stood on his first full day at the inn, looking out at the mountains, and marveled at how different he felt now. 2 weeks ago, he'd been broken, lost, running from a life that no longer fit. Now he was whole, found, running toward a future full of purpose and meaning. The transformation had been profound, and it had happened here, in this sacred space that Eleanor's family had created and maintained for over 100 years. "Thank you," he whispered to the mountains, to the inn, to the universe itself. "Thank you for showing me the way." Inside, the lights of the inn glowed warmly, and James could see Eleanor moving through the kitchen, Sarah working at her laptop in the library, Mr. Peterson sketching by the fire, Maggie playing guitar softly, and Catherine reading in one of the armchairs. They were his family now, bound not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual support. Tomorrow, he would begin his work in earnest, meeting with clients, helping people navigate their financial challenges, building his business and his reputation. Later this week, he would move into his apartment above the bookstore, beginning his independent life in Pine Ridge. But tonight, he was still here at the Cozy Mountain Inn, still wrapped in its peaceful embrace, still part of the community that had formed within these walls. And he knew that no matter where life took him, no matter how successful his business became or how much time passed, he would always come back here. The inn had given him something precious, a second chance, a new beginning, a way forward when he couldn't see the path. James called Biscuit and headed back inside, ready for one of his last nights in room 7, grateful beyond measure for the unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment, to this place, to this transformed life. The Cozy Mountain Inn stood solid and serene in the moonlight, its windows glowing with warmth, its heart still beating with the same mission it had carried for a century, to be a sanctuary for weary souls, a place of healing and hope, a pause between one life and the next. And inside its walls, 5 people who had been strangers just weeks ago sat together as family, each one proof that it's never too late to change, never too late to begin again, never too late to find your way home. The week following the open house was a whirlwind of activity. James found himself busier than he'd anticipated, meeting with the clients who had scheduled appointments and fielding calls from others who'd heard about his services. Each consultation reinforced his belief that he'd made the right decision. These were real people with real concerns, and he could genuinely help them. On Tuesday, he met with Bill's daughter and her fiancé. They sat nervously across from his desk, clutching each other's hands, clearly worried about what he might tell them. "Let's start with the basics," James said gently. "Tell me about your situation, income, expenses, debts, goals. No judgment, just facts." Over the next hour, they laid out their financial picture. The young man, Kevin, had substantial student loans from dental school. Bill's daughter, Amy, worked as a teacher and had smaller loans, but also minimal savings. They wanted to get married, buy a house, maybe start a family someday, but they couldn't see how to make it all work. James listened carefully, took notes, and then began walking them through a realistic plan. "The student loans are going to be part of your life for a while," he said honestly, "but they don't have to prevent you from living. Here's what I suggest." He outlined a budget that would allow them to make loan payments while still saving a modest amount each month. He explained different loan repayment options Kevin might qualify for. He showed them how they could start small with a house, something modest that fit their actual budget, not what a bank might approve them for. By the end of the session, Amy was crying with relief. "I thought you were going to tell us we couldn't get married for 5 years, or that we'd never be able to afford a house. But this actually feels doable." "It is doable," James assured them. "It requires discipline and patience, but it's absolutely possible. You just needed someone to help you see the path forward." On Wednesday, he met with Patricia Moore and her husband about retirement planning. On Thursday, it was a widow trying to figure out how to manage her late husband's life insurance payout. Friday brought a small business owner who needed help understanding his tax obligations. Each client was different, each situation unique, but James found himself energized by the work in a way he'd never been in his corporate job. This mattered. He was making a tangible difference in people's lives. Meanwhile, Catherine had her interview with the principal of Pine Ridge Elementary on Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, she had an offer. She burst into the inn that evening, her face radiant with joy. "I got it," she announced. "I got the job. I start in August, after I complete the certification program. They said they were so impressed with my experience and my genuine passion for working with children. 25 years of hospital nursing wasn't wasted. It prepared me perfectly for this." They celebrated with champagne that Eleanor had been saving for a special occasion, toasting Catherine's new beginning and marveling at how quickly life could transform when you made the decision to change. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't imagine a future that didn't involve the hospital, Catherine said. I thought nursing was hospital nursing, that those were the same thing. But they're not. I can still be a nurse, still help people, but in a way that actually sustains me instead of draining me. The inn helped me see that. The inn just held the space, Eleanor said with her characteristic wisdom. You did the hard work of reimagining your life. On Saturday, James moved into his apartment above the bookstore. It was small but charming, 1 bedroom, a cozy living area, a tiny kitchen, and large windows that overlooked Main Street. The bookstore owner, a woman named Margaret Chin, lived in the apartment next door and had already brought over a welcome basket with tea, cookies, and a note that read, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Come down for books anytime. Neighbors get a discount." His friends from the inn helped him move the few belongings he'd accumulated and set up the space. Mr. Peterson contributed a painting for the living room. Maggie gave him a housewarming gift, a small speaker so he could play music. Sarah brought a stack of books she thought he'd enjoy. Eleanor arrived with a basket of food to stock your pantry properly, and Catherine helped him organize his kitchen. As they worked together, transforming the empty apartment into a home, James felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you all," he said. "You've given me so much." "You've given us just as much," Sarah countered. "You've shown us what it looks like to take a leap and land on your feet. You've reminded us that change is possible." That evening, after everyone had left, James stood in his new living room and looked around. It was modest, nothing like the sleek apartment he'd had in the city. But it felt right. It felt like home. He walked to the window and looked out at Main Street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the brick buildings. A few people were out walking, stopping to chat with neighbors. The mountains rose in the distance, constant and reassuring. This was his life now. This was his community. This was home. On Sunday, he returned to the inn for dinner, a tradition Eleanor had insisted they maintain. "Just because you've moved out doesn't mean you're not still family," she'd said firmly. Sunday dinners are mandatory. They gathered around the familiar table, James, Eleanor, Mr. Peterson, Sarah, Maggie, and Catherine. Biscuit made his rounds, receiving his customary scratches and treats. The conversation flowed easily, covering the week's events and making plans for the future. "I've been thinking about the foundation," Mr. Peterson said. "I'd like to make a substantial initial donation to get it properly established. Enough to ensure the inn's immediate future and fund the first year of programming." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Harold, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently. "I want to. Margaret and I always planned to leave our savings to charity. She would have loved this cause, a place that helps people heal and transform. It's the perfect use of the money we saved together." "I can contribute too," Catherine offered. "Not as much, but something. I've been saving for years, not really sure what I was saving for. Now I know. I want to help ensure this place continues its mission. And I'll organize benefit concerts," Maggie added. "Regular fundraisers where all the proceeds go to the foundation. The Pine Ridge music community is small but dedicated. I think we can raise significant funds." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "I'll write about the foundation, help spread the word through my blog and social media. And I'm planning to donate a portion of my book advance when it comes through. This place changed my life. I want to help it change others' lives too." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'll provide all the financial management and legal services pro bono," he said. "And I'll contribute monthly from my business income. Whatever I can afford." Eleanor looked around the table, tears streaming down her face. "I never imagined, when my grandmother built this inn, she just wanted to help travelers find a place to rest. She could never have imagined it would become this, a true sanctuary with a community devoted to preserving it. You've all given me the greatest gift, the knowledge that the inn's work will continue long after I'm gone." "Not just continue," Mr. Peterson said. "Expand. Grow. Reach more people. Your grandmother's dream will live on and evolve, touching lives she never could have imagined." They spent the rest of the evening planning in earnest. James would work with a lawyer to formally establish the foundation as a nonprofit. They'd create a board of directors with Eleanor as the founding chair and the rest of them as initial board members. They'd develop a budget, set goals, and create a timeline for launching their first programs. "I think we should start with a writing retreat," Sarah suggested. "A week-long program for aspiring writers who need space and support to work on their projects." I could lead it, bring in some other writers I know. We could offer it at a sliding scale, so it's accessible to people regardless of income. And a music therapy program, Maggie added. Working with George and other local musicians to offer healing through music. Studies show how powerful music can be for mental health, grief processing, all of it. Financial literacy workshops, James contributed. Free classes for the community on budgeting, saving, retirement planning. Basic skills that everyone needs but many people never learn. The ideas flowed freely, each one building on the others, creating a vision of what the foundation could become. By the end of the evening, they had outlined a comprehensive first-year plan that was ambitious but achievable. As James prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled him aside. "Walk with me for a moment?" They stepped out onto the porch, where the night air was cold and clear. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the mountains were dark silhouettes against the sky. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said. "When you first arrived here 2 weeks ago, I saw a man who was completely lost. You reminded me of so many others I've seen over the years, people who had built lives that looked successful on the outside, but felt empty on the inside. People who needed permission to change, to start over, to choose differently." She turned to face him. "But what I didn't expect was how much you would give back. You came here to heal, but in healing yourself, you've helped heal all of us. You've brought this group together, helped us see that we're stronger as a community than as individuals. You've given purpose to the and beyond what I could have imagined." James felt tears pricking his eyes. "Eleanor, you gave me my life back. You gave me a place to stop running and start living. Everything I've done since has just been paying forward what you gave me." "That's exactly it," Eleanor said with a smile. "That's how it works. We receive grace, and then we extend it to others. The inn gave you sanctuary, and now you're helping ensure it can offer sanctuary to countless others. That's the most beautiful kind of legacy." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at the peaceful landscape. Then Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You're going to do wonderful things, James. With your business, with the foundation, with your life. I'm so proud of you." James drove back to his apartment, his heart full. As he climbed the stairs and unlocked his door, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The desperation that had driven him to leave his job. The random choice to stop at this inn when the snow had started falling. The people he'd met who had become family. The transformation that had occurred in such a short time. He'd thought he was running away from his old life. But really, he'd been running toward his real life. The one he was meant to live. The one that aligned with his values and brought him genuine fulfillment. Before bed, James opened his laptop and began writing. Not for work, but for himself, a journal entry capturing this moment, these feelings, this gratitude. He wanted to remember exactly how it felt to stand at the beginning of something beautiful, to have found his purpose, to be surrounded by people who believed in him. He wrote about each person at the inn and what they'd taught him. Eleanor's wisdom and grace. Mr. Peterson's gentle guidance. Sarah's courage to pursue her passion. Maggie's resilience in redefining success. Catherine's willingness to start over. And Biscuit's reminder that sometimes the simplest presence is the most comforting. He wrote about the inn itself, how a building could hold such power, how walls and rooms could create space for transformation, how a place could become a character in the stories of so many lives. And he wrote about himself, the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. The fear that had driven him. The courage he'd discovered. The life he was building, brick by brick, day by day. When he finally closed his laptop and went to bed, James felt a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities. The foundation work would continue to evolve. His business would grow. Life would unfold in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, in his small apartment above the bookstore in the town he now called home, James simply rested in the knowledge that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, living exactly the life he was meant to live. The journey that had begun with a desperate escape had led him to the cozy mountain inn, and the inn had led him to himself. Everything else, the business, the foundation, the community, the purpose, had flowed naturally from that moment of finding his way home. As sleep claimed him, James smiled, thinking about Eleanor's words. The inn doesn't fix people. It just holds space for them to fix themselves. And in that space, in that sacred pause between one life and the next, James had discovered something precious. Not just who he could be, but who he truly was. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. 3 months had passed since James first arrived at the cozy mountain inn, and spring had come to the mountains. The snow had melted, revealing meadows full of wildflowers, purple lupin, golden arnica, and delicate columbine. The trees were heavy with new leaves, and the streams ran full and fast with snowmelt. The world had transformed, and so had everyone who called Pine Ridge home. James stood in his office on a Tuesday morning, looking at his calendar with a sense of satisfied exhaustion. Every slot was filled for the next 2 weeks. His client list had grown to over 40 individuals and families, and he'd had to hire a part-time assistant, a recent college graduate named Marcus who was eager to learn the business. "You've got the Hendersons at 10, Marcus reminded him, poking his head into James's office. "They're the couple thinking about buying their first house." "Right," James said, pulling up their file. "Thanks, Marcus." The business had exceeded his wildest expectations. Word had spread throughout Pine Ridge and the surrounding communities about the financial consultant who actually cared about ordinary people, who didn't judge or talk down, who helped rather than sold. James had been featured in the local newspaper, and Sarah's blog posts about his work had brought inquiries from people as far as 2 counties away. But more than the success, it was the impact that fulfilled him. Last week, Amy and Kevin had come in to show him the offer they'd accepted on a small house, their first home. The widow he'd helped in those early weeks had returned to thank him, explaining that his guidance had given her confidence to manage her finances and even start a small business. The teacher who'd been worried about retirement had a solid plan now and was sleeping better at night. These were the moments that mattered. These were the reasons he'd left his old life behind. At the Cozy Mountain Inn, Eleanor was in her garden, planting vegetables for the summer. Her knees ached a bit more these days, but the work brought her joy. Biscuit lay nearby, his graying muzzle resting on his paws, content to keep her company. The inn was full again, a family going through a difficult divorce, a young man recovering from addiction, an artist who'd lost her creative spark and was trying to find it again. Eleanor moved among them with her characteristic grace, offering meals and conversation and the quiet, steady presence that allowed people to heal at their own pace. The foundation was officially established now, with its first board meeting held just last week. Mr. Peterson's generous donation had provided a solid financial foundation, and additional contributions from Catherine, James, Sarah, Maggie, and several community members had created a healthy operating budget. Their first program, Sarah's writing retreat, was scheduled for June and was already fully booked. 8 aspiring writers would spend a week at the inn, working on their projects with Sarah's guidance and guest lectures from published authors she'd invited. The excitement in Sarah's voice when she talked about it reminded Eleanor of why she'd kept the inn open all these years. Sarah herself had finished her novel and sent it to her agent, who had promptly sent it to publishers. 3 had expressed strong interest, and Sarah was navigating the unfamiliar world of book deals with a mixture of terror and excitement. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream," she'd told Eleanor just yesterday. 6 months ago, I was blocked and miserable. Now I have a finished novel and publishers interested. How did this happen? You gave yourself permission to write the truth, Eleanor had replied. And the truth always resonates. Sarah had also decided to make Pine Ridge her permanent home. She'd signed a lease on a small cottage at the edge of town with a view of the mountains and a sun-filled room perfect for writing. The community had embraced her completely, and she'd become a regular contributor to the local arts scene, teaching occasional workshops at the library and organizing a monthly book club. Maggie's transformation had been equally remarkable. She was now teaching guitar to 15 students, performing every Friday night at the pub, and had been invited to play at festivals throughout the region. She'd recorded a small EP of original songs that she sold at her performances, and the response had been overwhelming. But more importantly, she'd rediscovered her love of music. It was no longer about making it big or proving something to the Nashville industry. It was about connection, expression, joy. She played because she loved to play, and people listened because they loved to listen. That simple exchange had proven more fulfilling than any record deal could have been. She'd moved into a small apartment in town, and had begun dating a local carpenter named Daniel, who came to her Friday night shows and looked at her like she'd hung the moon. When she talked about him, her eyes sparkled with a happiness that went beyond music, beyond career, into something deeper and more lasting. Mr. Peterson had returned to the inn for an extended spring visit, delighting in the wildflowers and the way the light played across the mountains during this season. His paintings had grown bolder, more confident, and a gallery in a nearby tourist town had agreed to show them. He'd sold 3 pieces in the first week. But more than the artistic recognition, he'd found peace. The grief over Margaret's death would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. He'd learned to hold both the sadness and the joy, to honor her memory while still fully living his own life. Margaret would have loved all of this, he'd told Eleanor one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The foundation, the community we've built, the way we're all helping each other. She always said the best thing you could do with pain was transform it into purpose. That's what we're doing. Catherine had started her position as school nurse in August and had quickly become beloved by students, parents, and staff. She had a gift for making anxious children feel safe, for handling medical situations with calm competence, and for seeing beyond the physical symptoms to the emotional needs beneath. The little girl with diabetes, whose mother had met Catherine at James's open house, had formed a special bond with her. Catherine had worked with the family to create a comprehensive care plan, had educated the school staff about diabetes management, and had made sure the girl felt supported and normal, rather than different and limited. "This is what I was meant to do," Catherine had told the group at a recent Sunday dinner. "All those years in the hospital weren't wasted. They prepared me for this. But this is where my heart is. With children, with prevention, with education. I'm finally doing the work I was meant to do." She'd also been dating, tentatively, nervously, but with growing confidence. A fellow teacher named Robert had asked her to dinner, and they'd discovered a shared love of hiking and old movies. It was early still, but Catherine was learning to open her heart again, to trust that she could build a life that included both meaningful work and meaningful relationships. On a Saturday in mid-May, they all gathered at the inn for what had become their monthly family dinner. Eleanor had insisted on maintaining this tradition, and none of them would have missed it for anything. These people had become their chosen family, and this time together was sacred. Eleanor had prepared a feast: roasted lamb, spring vegetables from her garden, fresh bread, and a strawberry rhubarb pie for dessert. As they ate, they shared updates and stories, celebrating successes and supporting each other through challenges. "I want to make a toast," James said, standing and raising his glass. 3 months ago I was lost. I'd walked away from my entire life with no plan and no hope. I ended up here by accident, or so I thought at the time. Now I know there are no accidents." He looked around the table at each of them. "You all saved me. Not by fixing me, but by giving me space to fix myself. By showing me what authentic living looks like. By reminding me that success isn't measured in salary or status, but in purpose and peace and connection." His voice grew thick with emotion. "My business is thriving. I'm helping people every day. I'm part of a community that I love. And I have you, this family that we've chosen and built together. I have everything I need and nothing I don't. That's a kind of wealth I never understood in my old life." "To new beginnings," Mr. Peterson added, raising his glass. "To second chances," Sarah said. "To finding your way home," Maggie contributed. "To the cozy mountain inn," Catherine offered. "To family," Eleanor concluded, her eyes shining with tears. They clinked glasses and drank, and the moment felt holy somehow, as if they were participating in something larger than themselves. After dinner, they moved to the porch as the sun began to set. Maggie had brought her guitar and played softly while they talked and laughed and simply enjoyed being together. Biscuit moved among them, receiving attention from each person before settling at Eleanor's feet with a contented sigh. "I've been thinking about something," Eleanor said during a lull in the conversation. "About the future of the inn after I'm gone." The group grew quiet, the mood shifting. This was a topic they'd all been avoiding, not wanting to face the reality of Eleanor's mortality. "I'm 72 years old," Eleanor continued gently. "I'm healthy now, but that won't always be true. And I want to make sure the inn is in good hands when I can no longer run it." "Eleanor," James began, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've been watching all of you these past few months. I've seen how you've embraced the inn's mission, how you've committed to the foundation, how you've made this place part of your lives. And I have a proposal." She looked at each of them in turn. "I want you to consider becoming co-owners of the inn. Not now, but eventually. When I'm ready to step back, I want to know that the 5 of you will continue the work my grandmother started. Together, you could run the inn, oversee the foundation, ensure that this place remains a sanctuary for people who need it." The silence that followed was profound. James felt his heart racing, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Eleanor was proposing. "You'd trust us with that?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I would," Eleanor said firmly. "In fact, I can't imagine trusting anyone else. You understand what this place is, what it means, what it's meant to do. And more than that, you're already living the mission. You've all transformed your own lives, and now you're helping others transform theirs. That's exactly what the inn is supposed to do. It would be an honor, Mr. Peterson said, his voice gruff with emotion. The greatest honor of my life. Mine too, James added, and the others quickly echoed the sentiment. Good, Eleanor said, visibly relieved. We'll work out the details over time, the legal structure, the financial arrangements, all of that. But I wanted you to know my intentions. This inn has been in my family for 4 generations. Now it will belong to the family I've chosen, and that feels right. They talked late into the night about what the future might look like, about their dreams for the inn and the foundation, about the legacy they wanted to build together. It was heady and humbling and exciting and terrifying all at once. As midnight approached and people began to drift toward their rooms or their cars for the drive home, James found himself alone on the porch with Eleanor once more. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments together at the end of gatherings. Thank you, James said simply. For everything. For taking me in, for believing in me, for showing me what a life well lived looks like. You did the hard work, Eleanor reminded him. I just held the space. That space saved my life, James said. This inn saved my life. And now I get to spend the rest of my life ensuring it can save others. I can't think of a better purpose. Eleanor smiled and patted his hand. Neither can I. My grandmother would be so pleased to know that the inn will continue, will grow, will keep doing its work. And she'd be proud of you, James. All of you. You've taken what we started and made it something even more beautiful. James drove back to his apartment through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, his mind full of the evening's conversations and revelations. The idea of someday co-owning the inn with his chosen family felt both overwhelming and exactly right. He thought about the man who had arrived at the inn 3 months ago, desperate, lost, running from a life that had stopped making sense. That man felt like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. The transformation had been profound and permanent. In his apartment, James stood at the window looking out at the sleeping town and the mountains beyond. Somewhere up there, the cozy mountain inn stood sentinel, its lights glowing in the darkness, offering sanctuary to whoever needed it. Eleanor would be banking the fires now, checking on her guests, making sure everyone had what they needed before she retired for the night. And someday, not soon he hoped, but someday, James and the others would carry on that work. They would welcome the lost and the broken. They would hold space for transformation. They would offer the same grace that had been extended to them. It was a legacy worth having, a purpose worth pursuing, a life worth living. James pulled out his journal and began to write, capturing this moment, these feelings, this gratitude. He wrote about how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. He wrote about the business he'd built and the community he'd joined. He wrote about the family he'd found and the home he'd made. And he wrote about the cozy mountain inn, the place where lost souls found their way, where broken pieces were made whole, where endings became beginnings, where the weary could rest and the searching could find. The inn had given him everything he needed to rebuild his life. Now he would spend the rest of that life ensuring it could do the same for countless others. As he closed his journal and prepared for bed, James felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities. The foundation would continue to grow. The inn would welcome new guests. Life would unfold in its mysterious, beautiful way. But tonight, in this quiet moment, James simply gave thanks for the journey that had brought him here, for the people who had walked beside him, for the transformation that had changed everything. He had come to the cozy mountain and lost and left found. He had arrived broken and left whole. He had come alone and left with family. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and painted the world in shades of gold and pink, James would wake up and continue building the life he was meant to live. One day, one client, one moment of grace at a time. The cozy mountain inn had shown him the way home. Now home was wherever he chose to make it, and he chose here in these mountains with these people, doing this work that mattered. And that, James thought as sleep finally claimed him, was more than enough. It was everything. The end.